Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Good morning, everybody. Please take your seats, and we are ready to start day 2 of the Sustainable Growth Summit. And yesterday, we looked at some of the links between climate change and what's going on in the oceans. And we learned, among many things, that it would take 600 generations to reverse the changes that have already taken place in the oceans when it comes to ocean acidification. And the scientists are worried. And today we're going to look at what can be done by means of finance, by means of technological innovation, and by means of money. And to set us on the right track, we're going to start on the big scale, the global scale. Because saving the oceans require international cooperation. And how do you get that? The UN Environment Programme, the UNEP, is a key player with its Regional Seas program. And their announced speaker today, Kanako Hasegawa, had to remain in Kenya, but she has handed over the task of speaking here to a very distinguished colleague. He is an American marine geologist. He has focused his research on Australia's Great Barrier Reef for many years, so he knows what climate change looks like in practice. And now he's the manager of Grid Arendal, which is also a part of the Regional Seas program. So please welcome Peter Harris.
Okay. Thank you, Siri. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, especially today. You may have heard overnight in the news that CAMAR has agreed to a marine sanctuary, marine protected area in the Ross Sea, 1.5 million square kilometers of marine protected area. So what a great way to start the day. I have a statement from the executive director of United Nations Environment Program. I'm honored to be here on behalf of UNEP. On behalf of our executive director, Mr. Eric Solheim, he sends his regards for being unable to participate in this important event. As you may know, Eric has put the oceans as one of his top priorities in the coming years in the United Nations Environment Program. And this meeting's theme, climate change and seafood production on a global scale, echoes his thinking on the importance of oceans for sustainable development and sustainable food production. And as the former Minister of Environment in Norway, this summit also has personal importance to him, and I'm glad to be here to convey his message and on behalf of UN Environment. Today I would like to highlight the importance of the cross-sectoral approach to sustainable management of the oceans and seas. The health of ecosystems is the foundation for sustainable food production. With the generous support from the government of Norway, UNEP has started developing a cooperation between the environment sector and the fisheries sector in different parts of the world. And in the context of climate change, it is important for different sectors to work in the oceans together and join forces. And I am very glad to be here today with many of you and other participants in the fisheries sector. So the slide you see is one of the key conclusions. The title, Ocean Health, which is essential, a prerequisite for sustainable fish food production. My presentation has 3 parts. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about ecosystem-based management and the ecological foundation for food security. I'll mention a little history, a very snapshot of the Regional Seas program, and then I'd like to really focus on the cooperation that's been happening in recent months and years between Regional Seas program and the regional fisheries bodies. Okay, so ecosystem management, what does that mean? In the context of the oceans, we think of ecosystem services. I'm not sure if this term has been heard in this meeting yet. Ecosystem services. So wild fish are a service provided by the ocean for free. We don't have to do anything. The fish live in the ocean, and we can harvest that. We can catch those fish. So that's a provisioning service of the oceans. For the aquaculture sector, the fish growing in pens is also dependent on services provided by the ecosystem. You place your fish pens in an optimal location so the currents might wash away the sea lice, and the organic matter generated by the pen is processed in the benthic environment, in the sediments, so that there's no over supply of nutrients and the sediments do not become anoxic. These are services provided by the environment for free. And that's why we consider these very important aspects of the environment that are part of management, understanding the services that are provided for free by the environment. And we have to remember, this is going to move forward, that there are multiple threats facing the marine environment. It would be a mistake for us to leave here thinking that climate change is the only threat from humanity that we must consider in considering the governance and management of the oceans. In fact, if you consider the benthic environment, the seafloor habitats, a book that I was involved in with a group of scientists called GeoHab, you may not have heard of them. They're habitat mappers. They map the seafloor and benthic habitats. A recent book published by GeoHab, 63 case studies from around the world. Out of those 63, the number one factor of humanity's impact in the oceans on the seafloor was fishing. In fact, benthic trawling, pollution, aggregate extraction, the oil and gas sector, shipping, bringing introduced pests into different environments, the noise from the ships, and the noise from seismic process profiling, other factors, coastal development. There are many, many aspects of human activities that impact on the oceans. And the fact is that there's no place in the ocean where only one of these is actually acting by itself. There are cumulative impacts that must be taken into account. Multiple stressors acting together, weakening habitats, weakening the environment. When climate change impacts occur, they're occurring on habitats and environments that are already under pressure. They're already under stress from these other factors. So climate change is one of the important factors to consider when we look at how the environment is being impacted by humanity. So ecosystem approach to management requires that we consider all of these elements. We not only consider the value chain from the economic point of view, but we consider all the aspects of the environment, the ecosystem assessment part, the evaluation of ecosystem services that I've already mentioned, economic instruments that can be considered, policy instruments, the stakeholder engagement component, integrated planning and management, like declaring marine protected areas, and then climate change proofing. What do we have to do? What steps do we need to take to consider and include climate impacts in our planning and management actions? And then looking possibly for sectors to take consideration of these effects and change the way they do things. Finally, monitoring and evaluation to see how we're tracking. Are our policies having the right effect? Are we getting where we want to be? Are we on track? This is what integrated ecosystem management is about. It includes the social, the economic, and the environmental aspects of the entire ecosystem. If you want to know more about this, what I've just said, there's a book you can read. You can download it on the website from unep.org, and it's here on the UNEP's website. You can read all about how we can take steps towards arriving at an integrated approach to environmental management. In the United Nations, marvelous progress has been made in the recent years with last year with the new SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. All 17 of these relate to different parts of the environment and different parts of human activities, and how we can work together to make progress to achieve by 2030 these different goals. 10 of them are clearly related to oceans, including, of course, Goal 14, which is all about water and life below the waves. But it's probably quite true that many of these Sustainable Development Goals have something to do with the oceans in some way or other. I'm not going to spend any time on this slide, but I think we have to take into account where we are headed in the world, in the international context. The SDGs are the strategic goal for the human race over the next 12 years, 15 years, as we try to make progress towards these Sustainable Development Goals. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Regional Seas Program. It was established in 1973 and has been going now for the last, 30-odd years, and has made a lot of progress in different parts of the world. The understanding of the impacts of pollution was one of the main concerns at the outset when UNEP established the Regional Seas Program. The Regional Seas is UNEP's flagship marine program. And one of the other goals, of course, is to provide a framework to protect the marine environment at the regional level. So aggregations of countries working together. There are 7 UNEP-administered regional seas programs around the world, and there are 11 independent regional sea programs. And you can see that they cover most all of the coastal zones of the oceans and a lot of the areas around the continents and oceans around the world. So the regional seas programs have been very successful over the last decades in promoting actions and conservation and management strategies for the oceans. The main objective is, of course, here addressing the degradation of the oceans and seas, and it's important to recognize that each regional sea involves a partnership of countries working together. They are convened by a conference of parties that meet on a regular basis to discuss the strategies and directions of the regional sea itself. The funding is sourced from the countries to make donations to the Regional Seas Program. And each regional sea organizes its own action program and has their own programs of work. But there's several aspects that are common across the Regional Seas programs. They have a particular focus on land-based sources of pollution, looking at protected areas and conservation of biodiversity, being concerned about the possibilities of oil spills and preparedness for that, and then integrated coastal zone management, monitoring the progress of policies and legislation towards achieving conservation and management goals for the marine ecosystems. And here's just an example of some of the activities that are involved in regional seas. So looking at land-based pollution, biodiversity, sustainable consumption and production, monitoring and assessment, ship-based pollution, ecosystem-based management. There's one or two things I wanted to mention here before I move on, and that is relating to some of the strategies, the core activities that underpin the regional seas. And I think the first dot point up there, recognizing working in collaboration with other international bodies, including in particular, it's important here, the regional fisheries management organizations or regional fisheries bodies. And the idea here is working together to find ecosystem-based regional oceans policies. So that brings me to the last part of my presentation, which is really on this importance for collaboration between the fisheries bodies and between the Regional Seas Program. Yesterday, we heard the presentation by Professor Chesbu from IMR, and he showed the slide of Mette Moritson's work summarizing how often environmental information is used in framing policies and decision-making in the fisheries bodies. And it was a kind of a woeful sum, 26 examples out of 1,200 where environmental information is incorporated into decision-making. That's kind of a red flag right there. And that really is the underpinning reasoning behind this whole initiative. And that is to try to build ways for working more closely between the regional seas and the fisheries bodies. And this program has been generously supported by the Norwegian government, and securing the foundations for fish food security in a changing ocean in West Central and Southern Africa. Support from the Norwegian government's been provided for this. There's a historical case study that's really quite interesting, coming from the region around here, from the Northeast Atlantic, and a cooperation that's been under many years now, under development between OSPAR and the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission. I'll come back to that in a second. But the idea, the overarching point here is to try to encourage cooperation between regional seas programs and regional fisheries bodies. Come on, okay. So just a brief potted history on the development of this cooperation between the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries and OSPAR. There's another book you can download to read if you're interested about this, but there's quite an interesting story behind this cooperation, because it goes back for almost 10 years, actually over 10 years now, way back before 2005. And this is one of the main take-home messages. There's 10 years of work here that has taken place to try to build bridges between the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission and OSPAR. And some of the important steps were just getting the meetings together, and sometimes it's quite clear that there's been very little dialogue between the fisheries bodies and regional seas or other environmental agencies. But an MOU was developed and enacted in 2008, and that's followed some very important discussions, like on EBSAs, the ecologically and biologically significant marine areas, identification of those from now, not just an environmental perspective, but now including a fisheries perspective, because working together is a crucial thing. It turns out that the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission was responsible for fisheries and not for environmental aspects so much, whereas OSPAR is responsible for environmental aspects, excluding fisheries. So without working together, it's impossible for the entire integrated picture to emerge without the cooperation between these two organizations. And the first formal meeting under the collective arrangement just took place last year. So over 10 years of work to get to that point, quite a strategic and very important accomplishment. And we have just a quick idea of the steps you need to get to this, to all these different cooperations that are now happening around the world. First, information and knowledge sharing, a common discussion and deliberations, coordinating a worldview, adjusting behavior within the sector, and then looking at joint measures across sectors and at different levels. Well, here's a little alphabet soup map showing the ocean and all of the different regional fisheries bodies that exist. So CAMLAR down here that just managed to protect the Ross Sea, which is kind of split in half here. And of course, the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission up here in the north. But you can see there's a lot of these bodies all around the world. And if you look at then the regional seas and where collaborations are now taking place between these fisheries bodies and the regional seas, there's quite a lot of good news. There's quite a lot has been accomplished. And discussions and conversations are happening and they're underway. So it's a positive outcome. In May of this year, the United Nations Environment Assembly met in Nairobi. If you haven't heard about UNEA, some of you may not know about it, it's actually an international gathering of ministers of environment from all countries coming together, and they meet in Nairobi, and this year they met in Nairobi, and they discuss topics of international and mutual interest and concern at a global level, and they make a series of resolutions to take action and move forward, addressing the Sustainable Development Goals and other matters. A number of resolutions were made, and I just would like to highlight two of those here. These are decisions handed down from the UNEA, the United Nations Environment Assembly. And one of them related to cooperation that's needed between environmental and other sectors in managing the oceans. In particular, looking to try to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets. But Resolution 7 there specifically mentions cooperation and working together with regional fisheries bodies. So those are really quite important, in being recognized at the international level that this is a step we must take to make progress. So in Korea last month, we began another set of meetings. Another process was started, an initiation from the perspective of international discussions between the fisheries bodies and UNEP's regional seas. So in Korea, all the regional seas conventions assembled and met together, along with representatives from regional fisheries bodies. And the sole outcome included not only the dialogue between regional seas and the fisheries bodies, but also agreeing to continue the dialogue and recognizing that different regions are going to have to take different steps and different actions to address the concerns that are of regional importance, which are obviously different from one place to another. So the key take-home messages from this presentation are that ocean health is a prerequisite to sustainable fisheries. Without healthy oceans, you cannot have a healthy and sustainable fisheries sector. The ecosystem-based management approach is a way of managing the oceans and focusing on ecosystem services. And it's an important cornerstone of environmental management practices and thinking around the world internationally. Regional cross-sectoral cooperation between the environment and fisheries sectors is already started, and we are making progress. So that's more good news. And at the national level, such as at this gathering here, it's important that cross-sectoral cooperation is recognized as the basis for regional cooperation and is essential for healthy oceans. Now, I am here as the representative of UNEP, so I'm happy to answer questions as much as I can, but I have to be forgiven for if I'm not able to know specifics. I have Kaneko Hasegawa's email address on the presentation, which you'll be able to download. You can ask her, but I'll do my best to answer your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter Harris. And if you would like to ask questions to Peter Harris, you can send them in a text message to this telephone, and the number is provided on your table. So there is something that I would like to ask you, Peter. You're not getting off the hook so easy. You showed us the UN development goals, sustainable development goals. We talk about sustainable growth.
Yes.
What do you make of that distinction?
It's a subtle but important distinction, growth and development. As an ecologist, you acknowledge the fact that on a limited planet, that growth is obviously impossible to be sustained indefinitely. Nothing can continue and grow infinitely on a finite space. On the other hand, what we are talking about in sustainable development is the concept that by addressing ecological, environmental, economic, and social aspects together, you can make progress. You can have developments that actually that will address all three of the three pillars and actually allow progress to be made towards the goals. Now, that is what underpins progress towards sustainable development goals. You have to address all three, or you're not making progress. If somebody is going backwards, if the environment suffers, or if society suffers, that's not progress.
So sustainable growth could be a contradiction in terms.
It's a paradox, but I think as long as we understand what we're talking about, and I think that was one of the points raised yesterday, that we have to agree what we mean by sustainable. We have to agree on what we're talking about.
And I'd like to get to your background, because you have been studying the Great Barrier Reef for 20 years plus.
That's right.
And that is, many speakers yesterday mentioned the Great Barrier Reef as an example of what can happen. What have you seen happening there?
So actually, I'm embarrassed to say, my history of the Great Barrier Reef goes back to 1986, when I was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Sydney, and my project was on the Great Barrier Reef. So 30 years. And I was working up in the northern end of the Great Barrier Reef, up in Torres Strait, the junction between Papua New Guinea and the Barrier Reef. An interesting place geologically. I'm a marine geologist, so I know I like fish to eat, but not an expert. But the corals that grow in the northern end of the Great Barrier Reef were the ones most impacted by bleaching this year. You may have seen some of the reports coming back. The impact of the bleaching was not uniform along the Great Barrier Reef. It's 2,000 kilometers long. The northern end was the part most severely impacted. It was also, sadly, the part of the Barrier Reef that was in the most pristine, untouched condition. It's the most remote part of the Barrier Reef, farthest removed from civilization.
And this bleaching, that means that the corals turn white and they may die.
That's right. A coral that's healthy can bleach, and it can survive. It has to re-recruit its symbiotic algae. It's possible for these corals to do that, but on average, some fraction of corals will not be able to recover, and once they've expelled their algae, they are prone to die. And in particular, if they're already under stress from other pressures like pollution and other human activities.
So, if you're going to describe in one word what you have seen happening at the Great Barrier Reef, what would that word be?
Tragedy. A tragedy, and it is actually not mincing words here. It is a direct result of climate change, no question. Because bleaching events have occurred in the past, never to the extent we're seeing today, and never at the ongoing frequency that we are seeing. So it's not that the reef has never been bleached before, but there have been long enough periods of time in between events for corals to recover. So you have 100% recovery after a decade or so. But if you have persistent recurring bleaching events, there's not enough time for the corals to recover, and the bleaching then becomes a permanent result, and the reef is unable to recover. I think this is the kind of thing that Sylvia Earle was talking about when she mentioned the oceans are dying, and I wouldn't want to put it in such an emotive way, but I understand her passion and what she's thinking, because the oceans are maybe not dying, but if they were a patient, you'd probably want to take them to hospital because the oceans need attention.
Going to bring in a question here about the UNEP. And how does UNEP interact with large transnational companies which are keystone players in marine ecosystems, like Austevoll-gruppen, Marine Harvest, Evos, Skretting, and so forth?
That's a good question. And of course, UNEP answers to the countries of the world. UNEP is an international body, and it answers to its Council of Ministers. And so international corporations have a part to play, an important part to play. And I think within the Regional Seas program, there's actually at that level, at the regional level, is perhaps where the engagement is probably more real and more obvious to take place. Because within the regions, you can then begin to see how there are key players, and they need to be engaged for discussions on the regional level.
And now you are placed in Arendal, the grid Arendal, and from here, what role do you think Norway and its marine expertise can play on a global scale?
Well, Norway bats way above its weight in its contribution and its activities in environment. Norway is one of the largest donors to the UN, but into the United Nations Environment Program in particular. Just recently, an agreement was signed between UNEP and the Norwegian government for 3 years of funding. And the funding is 90 million crowns, so it's a very significant donation. A lot of that money is going to go towards oceans and marine-related activities. Some of the key points that have been identified by the Norwegian government include marine plastics and a focus on marine litter. But climate change is another key part of that, and my organization is working with UNEP in a program that's called Blue Carbon and Blue Forests Project. And blue carbon is the concept of coastal environments, in particular mangrove canopy and mangrove forests, that sequester significant amounts of carbon. And through the Global Environment Facilities, the GEF program, and the Norwegian government's funding through UNEP, we are working with many countries around the world to protect and conserve these very important mangrove habitats, which are key cornerstone habitats for carbon sequestration.
I have more questions coming in now, but I think I'll leave you to talk to the people afterwards, and those people sending questions maybe could be able to approach you and talk to you in the break. Is that okay?
Pleasure, Siri.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Peter.
much.
Often it turns out that innovation is linked to money. And one of the big money providers in Norwegian research is the Norwegian Research Council. So what is their ambition when it comes to sustainability and, in particular, ocean sustainability? The Executive Director of Energy, Resources and the Environment is with us. Please welcome Fridtjof Unander.
Thank you, Siri. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come here and say a few words about what the Research Council is doing when it comes to sustainability. The title of my talk is also the role of research for sustainable transition, and I will also allude to that, although after Peter's presentation right now, it should be quite evident that we have knowledge needs in many areas. But I'll get back to that. In Norway, we have one research council, which means that we cover research in all scientific fields, all sectors and areas. And that's a strength, because that means we have the opportunity to look across sectors, to push more coordinated efforts across sectors. Although we do receive money from all 16 ministries in Norway, so of course, for some of these ministries, there are certain strings attached, so we cannot spend the money completely freely. But besides then having the money that Siri mentioned, we have also an important role in providing advice to the government on research priorities. And that is very important, because in this context, it means that when we push for sustainability, which we do, and I'll get back to that, we do that both, of course, through the way we spend or we submit our calls, what we ask for in our calls through our funding, but also very important is through the way we provide advice and priority setting suggestions to the government. And now, when it comes to sustainability, the Research Council is now indeed emphasizing sustainability. We don't use the term sustainable growth. I'm not going to get into that discussion. We've had a lot of discussion about that in the Research Council. But anyway, our new strategy, which was launched last year, it's already a year, is called Research for Innovation and Sustainability. And these are not just words. This is something we mean that should be a direction that we want to take our efforts, but of course also the funding that we are or stimulate sustainability through the funding that we provide through our calls. And since we want this to be more than nice words, we are now working on making or follow up on sustainability more concrete. We're working on a separate strategy that will line out more concretely what we're going to do in terms of supporting sustainability. In that of course, this is a difficult topic, and especially since we are indeed covering all sectors, and in fact, we cover all the SDG goals of the UN, and they all interact and everything, so it can get quite complicated when we, at the end of the day, are supposed to provide clear calls to the research society. But as a very simple model here, when we talk about this, we talk about at one level, we talk about switching from resources that are not renewable or maybe not sustainable to resources that are more sustainable, renewable sources. That's one important part of what we're doing, which means we're pushing sustainability in oceans. And there are Oceans are renewables in many ways, if we handle it the right way, and I'll get back to that. Bioeconomy, very, very important. That's one area that we are pushing, which should increase sustainability. And of course, renewable energy. So that's one example that we try to have this resource substitution, and hence also when it comes to value creation. But then we also want to look at sustainability across all sectors, make all sectors more sustainable, even sectors that are polluting today, because the delta we can achieve can maybe be the biggest in sectors where we have high pollution. So that's another important aspect, that we are going to try and push this in all areas to develop new solutions and technologies, but also launching specific cross-cutting initiatives such as sustainable cities. So the idea here is, of course, to then have a coherent view on how our approach that would take into account both the social, the economic, and environmental dimension of this. And of course, value creation and environment are already today important aspects of the funding that we provide. But the one challenge is to have good criteria that could select projects, the projects that are the best in serving all these criteria groups. I'm not going to be able to get into that, but I should mention that in about 3 or 4 hours, the Commission on Grønn Konkurransekraft Innovation, which will be green competition advantages or something like that for Norway, will launch its report. They've been working for more than 1 year. That will happen at 1 o'clock this afternoon. So that will be a very important report in terms of how we should follow up at least the elements of environment and value creation when it comes to sustainability. When it comes to oceans, Peter has already said a lot of what I could have said. and so in the interest of time, I'll go quickly through this. But it's obvious that there is an enormous value creation potential from the oceans. The OECD launched this spring a report called the Ocean Economy 2030, where they look at what could be the developments and opportunities and challenges in developing an ocean economy in the world over the next 15 years to 2030. And they analyze that in a baseline scenario, the ocean economy can double to about $3 trillion. This is a big number, but you can try and work out the zeros and multiply it by Norwegian currency, right? And you get a big number. But so it's a doubling, basically. It happens primarily through aquaculture, through offshore renewable, maritime industry, shipbuilding, and fish processing, according to the OECD. This also, of course, has a very important impact on employment. But OECD is very clear on that this does require both technological advances, as well as knowledge needs for regulation and governments. And we're struggling to keep up with that. Peter was alluding to that. Because clearly ocean resources and space are under pressure. So when it comes to R&D needs, this is really the basis for a lot of the marine research that we are doing in Norway. There are clearly very, very important knowledge needs related to the utilization of the ocean resources, regulation, both understanding how ecosystems are responding to pollution, and not to mention climate change, which was an important topic yesterday. And of course, then also develop initiatives that can limit and reduce the impacts of economic activities in the oceans. And last but not least, the development of ocean technology. So I just wanted to say, without going into details, we have a strong focus in our calls through our programs to generate this knowledge. The second part is ocean technology, and this is an initiative that we have launched this year. It started out 2-3 years ago when we did an analysis and we looked at what is the interaction in our portfolio when it comes to the different blue sectors, meaning in Norway, offshore petroleum, offshore renewable, although we don't have much of that today, but we have ambitions, maritime industry, fisheries and aquaculture. These arrows are pointing to the number of actors that have applications in more than one area. And we see there is a strong synergy between the offshore petroleum sector, maritime industries, and offshore renewable, but very weak links when it comes to aquaculture, particularly. This was the starting point 2-3 years ago. We saw that there is an enormous, many people see this, there's enormous opportunities for technology and knowledge transfer between the blue sector, particularly from the clusters related to the petroleum and maritime industries in Norway. So what we have done is that we have launched a call this year, in the spring, where we combine our sectoral program, and those of you who are Norwegian and apply the Norwegian Research Council, we recognize many of these. We combine funding through these different programs into one common call with the requirement that that project proposals should demonstrate knowledge transfer and technology transfer opportunities between these sectors. So we launched sort of several packages in this. This was launched during the Ocean Conference that was here in May, here in Bergen in May this year. We now received the applications in October, or early this month, and it's quite promising. I don't have time to go into details here, but this is quite promising and something that we clearly want to follow up. I'm running out of time. I'm just going to illustrate very quickly from another very important area in the Norwegian context, and that is energy. Because renewable energy is clearly also extremely important in an overall sustainable development, at least when it comes to tackling the climate challenges. Clearly, if we're going to achieve a 2-degree scenario, and even more so if we're going to achieve a 1.5-degree scenario, energy markets need to change dramatically, which means there will be need for a lot of new technologies. There are many analyses that have showed this, but if you translate that back, if you take the International Energy Agency's, for example, numbers, and you translate it back to how many offshore windmills need to be installed every day from now and to 2050 in a 2-degree scenario, it's an enormous amount, much, much higher than what we are seeing today. So there is a great potential here. This figure is illustrating this from a Norwegian perspective. It shows the technology markets and the Norwegian share when it comes to renewable energy and offshore oil and gas. We are world leading when it comes to technology related to the oil and gas sector. We have almost 10% of the world market as of numbers of 2013. These are numbers from export credit. It fell out of this slide. But when it comes to renewables, we have only a 1.5% share of the technology market related to renewables. These markets are, at this slide, it's slightly less. It depends on how you count it. But clearly, this market is growing as we speak. And we all know that this market here is probably going to flatten out and maybe even fall. But it's clear which market is growing the most rapidly. So for Norway, it's clearly a challenge, but also an opportunity. We have a big share of this market, which is probably not going to grow very much, and we have a relatively small share of this market where we have very big ambitions, but we still need to create more value from that. So we're not the only ones seeing these opportunities or the challenges. So one thing is that when it comes to oceans, we have many advantages, but when it comes to developing climate technology, many other countries are putting a lot of effort into this, which is also very good, even if it generates competition. Mission innovation, shortly mentioned that. I think, in my opinion, that was a big change in the climate negotiations that took place last year when this agreement was signed in Paris, because this was the first time R&D related to development of climate solutions was lifted up on the agenda and actually resulted in an agreement. Because there's been a lot of talking about technology pull, in other words, get the markets to fix this, but we clearly need R&D to develop the solutions we need for tackling climate change. And we follow up, among other things, through our energy program. I don't have time to allude to that, so I'll just wrap up very quickly. When it comes to the role of research, I think it should be quite evident, but I would stress that we need research both to generate the knowledge we need, the basis for good management of resources, both from a governmental perspective, but of course also from the industry. And we need knowledge-based innovation to develop the smart solution that can also give us value creation. We are pursuing sustainable development, both in terms of promoting sectors that are more sustainable and based upon sustainable resources, but also across all sectors and all areas. We are working now on this, and we're trying to address the UN development goals in the way we're setting this up. It's a nice thought and it's important, but it's also a challenge to integrate all these targets into the work that we're doing through our research programs and our advice to the government. But we're working on it. Thank you.
Many thanks, Fridtjof. There was a professor of economics here yesterday from NHH, and he said that accidental features are critical and asked if sustainability innovators are offered opportunities in boom times. And how prepared is the Research Council to support innovators in an industry that's really booming?
Well, we are always looking for good proposals, but of course for us providing public money, the sort of the balance, the risk-taking part of that, the governmental money is supposed to compensate for higher risk. In some calls we have asked for proposals that have higher risk. We have done that, for example, within energy. We call it new concepts, but the name doesn't matter. But we are working on finding ways we can attract more let's say high risk, high gain proposals. So that's very important. I should also mention though that this mission innovation, one way of interpreting this is that we want to have focus on basic science that could very rapidly lead to innovation. So from lab to markets very quickly. So that's sort of one of the intentions of this international effort, which could also then hopefully provide more input from basic science to innovators that are looking into more high-risk opportunities.
But if an industry is going really well, would that be used against it if it came to the Research Council and asked for help?
No, not necessarily, but of course we have to have focus on additionality, when we put governmental money in, it should not be as a substitute for private capital. But typically we are supporting when it comes to technology development. We put lots of money towards smaller companies with good ideas, working closely with research institutions, but also bigger companies with let's say, more high-risk proposals, we certainly support.
One question from the audience here. How do you cope with the eventual pressure for being business-friendly, enhanced by the fact that the sea is considered the next big thing after oil?
That we are too business-friendly? Well, I think the ocean has enormous opportunities for value creation, and particularly for Norway, given the amount of oceans we have. We are very clear on that we need sustainability when it comes to ocean management and ocean research. This is nothing new. So this is clearly at the core of the research agenda. And as I said, we have a very important role in providing the basis, the knowledge that we need to have a sustainable development of the businesses. So on one side, we support research that give us that knowledge, which in turn also makes us more, let's say, informed in terms of the type of industry project that we're supporting.
Another question from the audience. Don't you think that the lack of coordinated, multidisciplinary marine observations data in the Norwegian administered maritime domains is one main limitation towards new knowledge, supporting innovation and sustainability?
I almost have to read that question again, but...
Do you think there is a lack, the person asking the question, there is a lack of coordinated, multidisciplinary marine observations and data in the Norwegian administered maritime domains? Do you think that's a main limitation?
Well, there's a main limitation, but it's a very important area to have better coordination of the research data and make them more, or the observation data, and to make them more available for research. That's clearly very important. And we generally want to have data and observations data available for all researchers so that we can get the best possible research independent of which institution they're coming from.
There is an interesting thing happening in the renewable energy sector that you also touched on, and you also cover energy at the Research Council. But the world demand for renewables has increased very fast, much faster than anyone really expected. And is there a lesson to be learned there for the seafood industry? Is there something we can take out of that? Fast change?
Absolutely. what has happened in the renewable industry is, of course, that there's a technology change. So it's solar panels, for example, has made a tremendous progress. So it's a technology market. It becomes a little bit, the growth rates are a bit more complicated and more limited when you talk about resources, especially living resources such as the biomarine resources. So there is a strong connection between that resource and how that develops and the growth and the limitations to growth, given that there are environmental challenges, for example, when it comes to aquaculture. But clearly there are lessons to be learned from that, and also from seeing that the tremendous impact technology change can have and how surprisingly fast it can happen. But I should add, though, that even if we talk about renewables changing very fast, it's not changing fast enough by far in order to reach a 2 degree or even more so a 1.5 degree scenario target.
Thank you very much, Fridtjof Unander.
Thank you.
From the Norwegian Research Council. We're going to turn to another source of money, the banks. And the world's largest seafood bank is Norway's DNB. Out of the 10 biggest seafood companies in the world, 7 of these would be the customers of DNB. So how do they use that influence in practice? Do they use it? Our speaker has the global responsibility for seafood at DNB, and she personally set up the office in Chile. So please welcome the head of international corporates, Trine Lo.
Thank you very much. We like to say that we are the largest seafood bank in the world, but we're even more pleased when somebody else says it. I'm happy to be here today to talk about sustainability. The banking sector is a sector that lives on long-term business. We don't get our money back in 30 days or 60 days. We get them back in 5 or 10 or 15 years. So sustainability is at the core of what we work with. The marine industries in Norway constitutes more than 1/3 of our GDP and 70% of our exports. Oslo Stock Exchange has of course these industries as their major industries, and for that reason, Oslo Stock Exchange is also the financial center for the seafood industry. This is the global strategy map for DNB, and we have the same industries at the top for what we have as our global businesses. We follow our customers abroad. We have presence internationally in important areas of the world where the largest fish stocks are, amongst others Santiago, where I spent 3 years, but also in Scotland, in New York, serving Canada, etc. And it's important for us to be there, to have enough knowledge about the industry, to follow both the potential but also the risks involved in sustainability, amongst others. DNB as a very large company in Norway, but also an important bank on a wider scale. It's of course very important for us to prove that we are also working within the corporate social responsibility and sustainability arena. And for that reason, it's important for us to be ranked and evaluated by other parties. And we are ranked as number 28 by the Global 100, and we're number 4 amongst banks. And this is something we're very proud of. This comes, both from the way we run our own offices to the way we run our business. And this week, it was actually announced that within the carbon program, disclosure program, we were upgraded to an A-, which I think is the highest of any of the Nordic banks, and the Nordic banks are highly rated on this. So sustainability for our business, like the Equator Principles, which also has a big impact on how we do renewable business internationally. So why do we care about CSR? I'd first like to say that on the dashboard of our group management, our reputation and the culture and ethics of our bank is one of the major issues. And that makes a difference when you run your business every day. I think you all know that banks have had their hit on reputation, and we don't know that reputation is something that actually hits the actual business when something goes wrong. And for us, we've had our issues like the Røeggen case, which was about asset management, or the Panama Papers, where we see that the reputation and the ethics of what we do actually has a big impact on business and how we are perceived. And for this reason also, we have expectations to our customers. We have requirements that we ask of them for us to provide capital or advice on how capital can be provided. And these are 4 of the major issues that have been commented on a lot both today and yesterday. And from my own experience, I can give a couple of examples. Sometimes these issues constitute an increase in risk that we have to take into account. Like, for example, we had a hydropower plant that we were financing in Chile, where we needed to build a channel to move the water towards the generator. And there was a rare salamander that lived in this area. And they actually had a track that was right across where this water channel was supposed to be. And the solution ended up being building a bridge so that the salamanders could continue their journey the way they had done for a long, long time. And this is the kind of considerations that you can take. It will increase the cost, but in this case, it was actually possible to do it. But we have other examples. We have also other hydropower projects in Latin America where the actual transportation of the power, the infrastructure, would have been affecting areas of land where the indigenous Indians have rights, and for that reason they have not been able to build them. So decisions around these major areas really do impact business every day, and they should do. And then there are many things that we simply do not do as a bank, and this is a way for us to work with sustainability. We don't finance unregulated fisheries. We don't finance harmful fishing techniques or endangered species. I can give one example. It's a company many of you will know. It's the Chinese fishing group, which acquired one of our customers some years ago. They were due to go on the Oslo Stock Exchange, and we were very well positioned to assist them in this, and that would have been very good business for the bank. But because they were doing fisheries in areas that were not proper, and they were also, I think, I'm not sure it was proven that they did illegal fisheries, but there were issues around it, and we as a bank decided actually not to go forward with this. They were not listed, and there they are today under bankruptcy. So sustainability is really important. These are the areas that I'd like to comment that we assess when working with our customers. There are key sustainability issues in the seafood sector as such. If we look at the fishing fleet and the vessels, it's of course about the utilization of the resources, it's about pollution. Looking at the aquaculture, there are several. It's of course the biological boundaries itself, it's medication, chemicals, genetic influence, and the service industry, which is very important as well. Of course, chemicals, again, emissions, waste of raw materials. These are areas that we address when discussing which companies we would like to finance and back. And as an extra precaution, we have an internal regulation saying that if more than 50% of the income for a company comes from areas that are outside high-income OECD, we have to make extra precautions in the assessment. And this is a contradiction that was also commented on yesterday. The salmon is by far more popular than the salmon farmer. And it has been like this for a very long time, actually. Some people yesterday said we can probably live with it. I'm not so sure it's right, because it's not even a right picture. We have seen, for example, that this can have a real effect on the product and the sale of the product. That has been the case in Chile with salmon and with antibiotics. So there is a real effect. We also know that that is improving now. But And it can also have, for example, political effects. If we look at the willingness of governments to issue new licenses, if this is the image of the salmon farmer, that could also be an effect. So I think it's actually very important that the salmon industry and the seafood industry works with the image of the industry and make sure that the information about how healthy this is run today is widely known. And that is not the case, not even in Norway, and by far in other countries. Because salmon actually has a fantastic story to tell. 99% reduction of the use of antibiotics over the span of 25 years. And today, salmon uses about 10% of the antibiotics as a Norwegian meat producer. But the Norwegian meat producers are among the best in the world. So they are about 5% of the average global meat producer. So this is actually a really important message to get through to people, because it shows what a fantastic story salmon has today to tell. I'd like to comment on the cooperation as the Norwegian success factor. We talk about this as the Norwegian model, but having experience in following and financing seafood, both from Norway and globally, we see that the cooperation in Norway between the industry, research, and the government really is something special. It's probably also culturally, because in Norway we have a high level of trust, we have a low level of hierarchy, and that fosters cooperation in a different way than you will have in many other countries or cultures. So that's something to take into account. But I think, the ability that the industry has had to cooperate, to share knowledge to the best of the development of the industry really is something unique. And we've seen other countries have not mastered this, and it has hurt their business and their development. I'd like to end off this speech on a positive note. The production of Norwegian salmon has been more or less stable in volume over the last 4 years because of the biologic limits. We believe that with research, there will be possible to have growth within even Norwegian salmon production going forward. But of course, the growth in general and the possibilities within farming in general, farming in the sea in general, and also the marine resources, there are vast opportunities. I think that salmon farming is the only major industry where Norway can say that we are truly global. And I think that the cooperation that we have had in Norway and the way this has functioned and the way we talk about sharing knowledge like here today is going to be the key facilitator to make sure that we can handle the sustainability issues that we have. That is why we are a member of the UNFCCC Seafood Innovation Cluster to help facilitate these discussions today. We believe that there will be a lot of potential. Norway has an immense knowledge in the industry to help foster future opportunities, both within the salmon industry itself, but not the least within all the technology and all the services that are provided around this, which other actors and other parties in the world are really keen to utilize. And we have to be aware of these resources that we have and make sure we use them in the right way. And DNB is keen to be a party in this growth and help finance and provide capital for future opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trine. We have questions coming in, and one of them is asking, do you finance unregulated fisheries which do not have an obvious sustainability risk? Scallops, earlier king crab, some sharks.
No, we don't. That's the answer. We don't. The regulation is really an important part of the boundaries of what we can do as a business. And what we do is, it's visible what we do. It's really important that we can show what are the limits for what where we will provide capital.
We've seen the banks taking a tougher line in some issues lately, such as coal, for example. Do you see a tougher line coming also with regards to sustainability in aquaculture?
I think that will come. And I think that the discussions we have on the issues are more and more frequent. So I think we will see it. It's usually the banks are slower than the industry. So usually we're learning from the industry, but I think that's why, as a bank, having industry knowledge is so important, because that makes us able to actually follow these issues closely.
And you mentioned trust and you mentioned collaboration, but then what about the formal regulations in place? You've worked in Chile, which is different from Norway when it comes to the formal regulations of aquaculture. How do you as a bank appreciate the formal regulations?
The formal regulations are sort of the floor and the basis of what we do. But I think actually when in our work, both in the bank and with our customers, I think actually the culture of what you do and don't do is more important, because you can never regulate yourself out of every issue. The regulations will always be behind what actually happens. So I think the culture is really important. That's one point that I can comment on that's interesting. For example, I've recently been 5 years in the UK for the DNB. And the regulators in the UK over the last years, they actually now come to the banks and they don't look as much on the balance sheets. They actually ask about what kind of clients do you have, and then they ask us to tell them what kind of culture do you have. What kind of culture do you foster in your bank to make sure that you have a business that's run in the correct way? So that's a very interesting point.
And one person asks here, what factors have led to DNB as a bank having such a strong sustainability focus?
I think actually we've learned a lot from the industries we work with, because I think that actually that being a party of the industry development is a big part of it. But I think also the responsibility of being such an important employer and player in terms of funding capital really gives us a responsibility and an opportunity to be there to provide ways of making sure we run business in the right way.
When you point to the countries outside the high-income OECD zone, so to speak, special consideration for those, is that based on bad experience?
Oh, it's based on the fact that normally if you have lower-income countries, you will have less regulations.
Your emphasis, asks a person in the audience, was very much on salmon, and do you foresee that will also be the case in the 5, 10, 30-year perspective you referred to?
I think obviously the experience that we have in Norway from salmon farming is going to be used in other types of farming of fish species, but also other types of utilization of marine resources. And we as a bank, we are interested in following this development and see where we can help provide funds when we get to a stage when that's actually commercially viable.
There's a question asking, do you finance land-based farming? And I suppose that means fish farming, but do you finance land-based farming?
Yes, some of our customers do also run land-based farming, so to a degree that's true, yes.
And you have worked on this for some time, you worked on several continents. What do you see as the big question for the years to come for a bank when it comes to aquaculture?
If we think about the development of the potential in aquaculture, I think it's actually about providing capital for growth and to get good ideas to be developed. I think a lot of the large institutional players will be the ones that will actually also come up with new initiatives, either new species or new resources of algae or other resources. But I think actually one of my key issues that I think we should discuss more is how to help facilitate early stage growth for innovation.
Thank you so much, Trine Lo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions, and I'd also like to remind you that if you hear something that you would like to share with other people, we are on Twitter, and we would very much appreciate those ideas to be spread. So now we're going to look at 3 examples of innovation in aquaculture. And what do you think is the link between salmon, flies, and feather? Researchers are searching for the perfect feed, and the research director of NIFES is an expert on feed. He is going to explain how and why they look at alternative resources. So please welcome Rune Vågbø.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk about my world on feed and also welfare issues, safety issues in farming. So this funny title about feathers and flies, they are not just high-flying thoughts. So we acknowledge that we have a need of and that seafood is part of the world supply of seafood in the coming times. And it is also related to this report that was recently launched from the UN. We also realize that the growth has to be, or it is estimated to be in a range of 100 million metric ton in seafood, global seafood production. And it's the same range as the capture fisheries. Independent of what prognosis that it is based on, and this is on short term. So and at longer term, we have even higher expectation of growth. So there's sustainability aspects in this. We have a need of feed. We have a need of protein-rich ingredients that will support this feed production and also fish production. At the same time, we have climate changes, and it has been talked much about climate changes, but this is also affecting the aquaculture on a local situation, and where we, even though we are talking about elevated temperatures in our fjords, we're not talking about bathing temperatures, but in how the fish is not thriving at elevated temperatures. So by elevated temperatures, we see a reduced feed efficiency. We said environmental loads in the local fjords, and also welfare issues of the fish. Sustainability is involves many aspects, and for me and for the feed area, we are talking about sustainable feed resources and how to fulfill coming production of seafood. We see here the growth of seafood. It is expected on a short term, but also in a long term to grow. And as was said here, it is growth in itself cannot be sustainable as such. But how can we meet this growth when we know that the raw materials from the marine environment is limited, has been there for a very long time, and how should we have an input of feed ingredients? Today I'm talking about this flies and feathers and how this can take part in this production. But we have, with new feed ingredients, we have new safety issues, we have climate changes that need to be considered. We have to adapt the feed towards our climate changes. And at the same time, new feed ingredients, that means that we have to estimate the requirements for the fish. And of course, we like to think that some of the solutions are sustainable, but we have to confirm this in own analysis. So in our effort, we want to use ingredients that are not used directly for human consumption. Most of these today can be used directly for human consumption, so why not try to use waste sources from the supermarkets, bioconvert these high carbohydrate ingredients into nutrients that are needed for the fish. We also focus on animal byproducts. That means byproducts from other production chains. And as you see here, it is just the feather or the poultry, and also pigs that are allowable to use today. I will come back to that. When we look at the potential for using animal byproducts, it is in Europe estimated to be 100 million or 1 million ton at this stage. But we this is just for the European situation. And this is limited to pigs and poultry due to the BSE situation. And it was, actually it is not a new issue to use animal byproducts in fish feed, but it was banned in 2001 due to this BSE scandal, or mad cow disease in our terms. But it was lifted in 2013 for poultry and pig industry, and to be used in aquafeeds. And we see from the ingredients that there are blood products, and there are feather meals, and it also bone and meat meals that are for use. When we look at how much of this that we used for fish feed in 2015, the ban was lifted in 2013, and we see that most of these are poultry and feather meal, and we have some blood meal that are for use. It is, as I said, it is not a new thought that we can use byproducts in fish feed, and it has been shown that using feather meal can replace other proteins with up to 25%. There are some limitations with all ingredients, and by mixing protein-rich ingredients, we can complete the diets, as we say in nutritional terms. Another project supported by the Research Council showed that we can replace 50% of the lipids and proteins from animal byproducts without any harm for the growth, retention of nutrients, and intestinal health. We see that we have shortcomings in some areas, but we have to realize that we can refine these ingredients in a better way and make it more suitable directly for aquafeed. NICE is a network of insects in circular economy. It is also a Research Council financed network in a Nordic network. And we see here using offals from other industries and fruits that can be bioconverted through the flies into fish feed, and that produce seafood for the human consumption. In this circular economy thinking, we see that and realize that the discards from other industries and productions are 1/3, and it is estimated to be 1 billion tons. So it is enormous potential to use. By also using waste or underused resources from the marine environment, we can produce flies larvae that can have a certain content both of omega-3 fatty acids and also other minerals and nutrients that are coming from the marine environment. In fish studies, fish growing studies, we see that it is similar to fish meal, and also for the fillet quality, safety aspects that are followed, and also sensory testing. That means that we can produce protein in a sustainable manner from carbohydrate sources, and we can retain these valuable nutrients within the food chain. But also, having new feed resources means that we have new safety issues. And we know about the discussion about dioxin and dioxin-like PCBs that are in the fish fish resources. But we are going now into new and novel areas of ingredients that we have to follow. And one of these are, strange enough, how to identify the species we are using. And this is mostly because we are not allowed to use ruminant protein in production, and to make sure that we are not having a species that are from a ruminant area, we have to sort this out with DNA and proteomics analysis. We also need to be sure that we are not taking any contaminants or medical residues together with us into the production. And here it is illustrated by the flies. If we use kelp as one of the resources in production of flies, we need to follow the accumulation of heavy metals in the fly larva. And we see increasing the level of kelp within this substrate for the flies, we increase also heavy metals. So by choosing the correct kelp types and correct farming condition, we can tailor the fly larva and the ingredients. We also have conditions, as I said, with the climate and that we have to sort out. We see reduced feed efficiency and protein retention. That is what we produce. That is really the production and the growth in aquaculture. And we also see that the fish suffers at elevated temperatures, for example, or lower oxygen levels in the seas. That is on the local level. And also that we experience welfare diseases and production-related disorders, as we say. We can meet this by introducing animal byproducts or insects. We see that the insect lipids, it's a lot of saturated fat, and fish oil did also contain high levels of saturated fat. The fish needs it, and we can then support the fish feed with this saturated fat. And thereby reducing the metabolic disorders that may come from just using plant oils, and also improving the disease resistance, as some studies have shown. We can also prevent histidine or prevent cataract by histidine-enriched blood meal, and also by having these ingredients, we support minerals that can prevent bone disorders, as recurrently we see in aquaculture. So to sum up, we acknowledge that we need production of safe and nutritious seafood for the growing population in the world. And if we can produce this, through circular economy and have a circulation of the nutrients using waste, it is very beneficial. And of course, we have to make sure that we grow a healthy fish, and then we can meet the challenges from the climate by tailored fish feed. And also, after all, we have to make sure that the fish feed and thereby also the fish outcome, fish production, is safe and nutritious for us as consumers. Thank you very much. Just see the seminar that come.
Many thanks. And we have lots of questions coming in about this.
Very good.
And the first one is very simple and short. Is a feather-fed salmon tasting fish?
Yes, it does. It does not change any. It is mostly protein, and as you know, protein cannot. It is coded to be fish protein, so it is not will not affect the taste.
So you can personally confirm the taste is good.
Yeah, it tastes fish.
And another question: what will be the public perception of feeding waste to fish? An article in the UK newspapers last week said this is foul to do this. Will consumers understand that this is good?
Well, it is my task to show opportunities and not necessarily what the market says. You know, we have very many opinions in the fish market. So I just show you the opportunities for producing and using this in, as popular wording, in a circular economy.
But do you think this could be a potential
It is
problem?
Absolutely potential. It is a potential problem already, but it is also an information matter, and also how to present it for the different markets.
Yeah. Norwegian aquaculture is allowed to use pig and chicken proteins in fish feed. Isn't it a recycling of pollutants such as dioxins, PCB, and residues of antibiotics that we do not want?
All use of ingredients or recycling contain contaminants and unwanted compounds. But we have to be sure that we don't, and by controlling this, and also look at how the fish act on these pollutants to be sure we have a safe product.
Final question here. What about upscaling? How big a production area do you need to produce enough fly protein to cover even 3 months of the local annual fish feed requirements? And how would it smell?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's we have in the production we talked about using marine ingredients and smell, and of course it smells, but that is in the factories, and that can be controlled. But the nice thing about insect production is that it needs much less area of production and also much less water. That is sustainable characters that need to be considered.
Mm. There is actually one legal problem with the production of insects and flies that you are encountering.
Yes, and it is a legal challenge since insects are considered as animal byproducts or processed animal protein, to be correct. And but there are optimistic signals that says that this will be open already next year. So we're looking forward to this.
Wonderful.
To see the potential.
Looking forward to seeing how this develops. Thank you, Rune Vågberg.
Thank you.
Now, the news agency Seafood Intelligence has recently ranked Cargill's EWOS sustainability report the #1 in sustainability reporting. So let's hear from Cargill. What do they do about climate change, and what are their ambitions? The sustainability manager of Cargill Aqua Nutrition has promised to come up with at least 5 ways of doing so. Please welcome Dave Robb.
Thank you very much, Sue. Good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity to come and speak to you. It's a great honor, and it's very nice to see so many people here interested in sustainability around aquaculture. I just started a few months ago as sustainability manager for Cargill, so finding my way in a new, very big organization where I was used to EWOS. And just as part of the information, I'll just start with a quick whistle-stop tour around Cargill for you before going into the 5 ways that we're working on climate change within Cargill Aquaculture Nutrition. So Cargill is already 150 years old. It was started by William Wallace Cargill, who moved from, had Scottish origins, moved over to the States, and with the expansion of railroads across the US, he and his brothers set up various grain collecting sites, grain elevators, based originally in Iowa. The company has grown mainly around the food, feeds and raw materials business, and is now last year was over $100 billion revenue, working globally, entirely globally now. So as a global player, our purpose is to be a global leader in nourishing the world. And a few buzz slogans here for you. We aim to be the most trusted source of sustainable products and services for our customers. That's from the annual report last year. And that's a really big challenge for us working globally. Sustainability is a new landscape, we can say. The science is not developed, the goalposts are not developed, it's constantly moving. It's not just environmental, it's social, and of course, underpinning everything, as we've said various times over the last few days, economic as well. We're here to make business, even if some of the students yesterday were very graciously not listing business as their primary driver. It was more about sustainability. So in terms of Cargill's activities around sustainability, we, as a global player throughout the raw materials sector through to the feeds, we're able to leverage our expertise in a variety of different ways, working on aspects of environmental and social sustainability. Within land use, we're working to end deforestation and upgrade lands within our areas within our influence. For water is going to be an incredibly important resource over this century, and many people predict that most wars this century will be fought over water resources. There will be water stresses around the world, and Cargill is helping within our supply chains to work out to conserve it where we need it. And a few minutes ago, I think we don't need to conserve water necessarily here. We have a little bit too much, like I have in Scotland as well. But also to improve the uses of water and where it's needed as well, improve the access of local communities to clean and safe water. Climate change, which is the main point of my talk, is we're working on to reduce greenhouse gases in particular. And that's incredibly important when we look at the global food chains. A report by Nature in 2012 estimated that about 1/3 of human impact on greenhouse gases is related to agriculture, and of that about a half, so 1/6, is related to livestock and aquaculture productions. That's a big challenge for us. The rest is probably around transport, mainly, but I'm seeing Gail Larson nodding gently. That gives me a good confirmation there. So I think that gives us a good challenge. It's a good place to work from. Also, importantly, we're working with farmer livelihoods. The farmers are in here to make money as well. But what we see often is that there's a good relationship between sustainable production and increased efficiencies and yields, which helps the farmers produce not just for themselves today, but for their families into the future. So again, helping with sustainability into future generations. Climate action taken by Cargill as a corporation. We've been involved and signed a signatory to the New York Declaration on forestation, together with 40 other companies and 30 countries, which has pledged to reduce deforestation by half by 2020 and to eliminate, on balance, deforestation by 2030. These seem like long time frames, perhaps sitting here, but these are very ambitious goals when we're talking about major world politics and drivers. Following up on that in 2015, the American businesses pledged publicly to support the US government in their actions on climate change. And that was a big step forward for a country where there was a lot of debate around climate change and whether it even existed, let alone whether it was important. From this, Cargill's now developing policies, both on a global and regional level, to address deforestation in particular and other aspects around climate change. And these are giving us goals and timeframes for development. And timeframes are incredibly important to have, of course. So moving now into Cargill Animal Nutrition. We are active in over 40 countries. We have bases in over 40 countries with sales in over 100. We are really global. And Cargill Aqua Nutrition, which is the group which bought out EWOS last year, we are active in most of the main markets for aquaculture. I think what's interesting, just to give you a little bit of background about the magnitude of aquaculture that we're talking about, the FAO in 2014 reported that there was about 90 million tons of aquaculture globally. Now, around about 49 million tons of that is actually fed. The rest is algae and shellfish, which are able to feed off resources in the water. But of that 49 million tons of fed aquaculture, we use 48 million tons of commercial feed and 32 million tons of homemade feeds. That's an enormous amount of resources going into global aquaculture. And aquaculture is seen to be growing hugely to help feed the world in many places and in other parts of the world to provide more high-quality foods. Cargill, in that terms, we're producing about 2 million tons of feed. So you can see that 2 million tons is a lot. I can't imagine what 2 million tons of feed looks like particularly. But as a player on the global scale, we're really quite small still in aqua. So moving on to the thrust of the talk, where does aquaculture feed impact on climate change? Having a quick look at the life cycle analysis of feed, where we can then tease out the carbon dioxide relative parts, which is what we're interested here in this talk. Raw materials, which is this part here, in an analysis from the production of raw materials to delivery at the farm gate. That's the analysis that we're looking at here. We can see here that raw materials account for about 80% of the carbon dioxide emissions related with the feed. Here is the transport of those raw materials to the factory. Here is the production of the feed inside the factory, and here is the transport from the feed factory to the farmer. This is for a typical average Norwegian salmon feed. For a shrimp feed in Thailand, it would be a different scenario, of course. But this is an example. This was some work that we did together with the European Feed Producers Organisation, FEFAC, this year as part of an EU project. And this gives us some areas to work on. And I think also, just very briefly touching on it, because I won't touch on it again, we talked a bit about transport and how important that is. When we're using a lot of soy in the raw materials, which is produced mainly in South America, and you see that transport only equates for about 5% of the total, it's not so bad to be using global transport links for an industry like this, because we're using incredibly efficient methods of transport, namely very large bulk carrying ships, as opposed to bringing lots of trucks around the country. So that's quite good. Now, one thing I should say, this is obviously in percentage scale, and it was mentioned several times yesterday. It's interesting to give us some measurements that we can all get a hold of. So about one kilo of salmon feed delivered to the farm gate produces about 1.5 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilo of feed. That I looked up is equivalent to five large cups of latte coffee. So the latte coffee might give you the shakes, and you can see I'm slightly shaking this morning. I've only had 2. That 5 cups of coffee will wear off by the afternoon, but the effects of eating a kilo of salmon will last a lot longer for you in terms of health. So when we start to look at the opportunities that we have within a feed company to work on climate change, you can see that we've got an awful lot to do. We're looking at our raw material changes here, and as a feed company, we are then pivotal position on what happens within the value chain. We select the raw materials that we want to use and make into feed. We also, by our formulations, determine how well that feed acts to a degree for the farmers. The farmers choose or choose not to buy our feeds, and that then goes down to make food, salmon or shrimp or whatever species that you're growing, that people eat. And so we are custodians of the transition of the nutrients in a raw material that people don't want to eat so much to a material a food that people want to eat, which has to be nutritious. We say that, yes, you can eat soy. You can eat anchovies. You can eat rapeseed. That isn't actually very nice at all. But into coin a phrase from Crocodile Dundee, you can eat it, but it tastes like. We want to eat something that tastes delicious and also which is very healthy and nutritious for you. And seafood brings us that. So how are we going to do that? Cargill is in a great position in this because we are heavily involved in raw material sourcing, production, and supply. And so by leveraging on our value chains, we're able to work in some of the big agricultural sectors. For example, palm, which I know is contentious in Norway, but it is heavily used within feed and food production around the world. Within soy, and these two are heavily associated with deforestation in recent years, but also within other crops, wheat, rapeseed, sunflower, in areas that we deforested 200-300 years ago as well. We mustn't forget that Europe's been deforested also. So how can we improve the production of these areas, working with farmers to generate standards to improve the overall sustainability of these crops? And there are various programs such as the RSPO, Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil Production, RTRS, Roundtable for Responsible Soy Production, Proterra, which is working on non-GMO soy, and the SCI platform, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, working on a variety of other crops to improve the production of these crops that are now forming the major inputs into aquaculture feeds around the world. Here, Cargill, with its other links, has a huge advantage over many other players in the aquafeed sector. We can also work on using some more byproducts, and this touches onto the area that was talked about earlier. What alternative raw materials can we use which are not taking resources from the current food chains. And one area that's been really advantageous over the last few years is the use of fish trimmings. So fish caught for human consumption. In the West, we're fussy. We don't eat all the bones and the heads and the viscera. There's about 40 to 60% waste to produce a fillet that we like. When I talk to my Asian colleagues, they don't really understand the aspects of all of this waste because that's normally consumed. But we can see that in Legacy EWOS team that was bought out, we've used more and more of these trimmings within the meals over the last 5-6 years. And now in some countries here in Scotland in particular, due to our local pressures from our customers, we're up to 40% of the marine ingredients used are sourced from trimmings, which would otherwise be waste. Traditionally, that would have been tipped overboard or even worse, put into landfill. But now, more and more, we do use those materials back into the food chain, help saving energy that's already spent there. And that's the first, another aspect of starting to impact on climate change. Talked a bit about the raw materials we use. Now on to what we can do in the factory, various energy efficiency programs that we've run. This is within Cargill Animal Nutrition. We're giving ourselves some targets that we've set by 2015. We've met those. We've now set even more ambitious ones within for 2020 to improve our efficiencies. Things like making better use of energy, also making pellets right first time rather than having to produce them so that the quality of the pellets is better. And as an example here from Cargill in aquaculture nutrition in Scotland, I can show you that some of our energy efficiency programs, you can see that over the last 5 or 6 years, we've not only reduced the energy use in blue here, but also we've significantly reduced the greenhouse gas emissions related with our production in the factory. And in this case, we benefited greatly from the Scottish energy mix being switched mainly from a coal-based electricity supply to gas-based electricity supply, while the rest of England continued using a lot of coal. Now, that's not a reason for independence, but which is being discussed at the moment, but it does encourage us to split slightly. Sticking with Scotland, not least because I'm actually based there at the moment, we've also just put in some energy reclamation units based also around our biomass boiler. So we're using biomass fuel in the factory. We're also reclaiming heat that's produced and transferring that heat to heat water that goes back into the factory. And that's already given us about a 20% energy savings, as well as reducing sulfur dioxide emissions coming from the chimney. So straight away here, we're getting an impact on greenhouse gases, which is also having a positive impact on the economies as well. And again, tying into themes that have come over the last few days, we've got to make this work economically. We've worked a lot on improving the transport to the farms, because you saw that on my original graph, that's probably 10 to 15% of the energy. And moving feed instead of by trucks around using large boats. Here the EWOS, the boats here in Norway that you're probably familiar with. Much more efficient methods of moving the feeds to the farmers, and also helping improve logistics so the farmers get the feeds on time, which is incredibly important, and also driving down cost. Not all of our facilities, of course, can deliver feed to farmers by boats. In Asia, there's lots of small farms where we have to truck in many cases, but where we can use more energy efficient methods, we do. Just jumping quickly, because I'm aware of the time. Very important at the end is to help our customers get more from our feed products. You can produce a Rolls Royce, but if you give it to a guy who doesn't know how to drive, it's not going to work. If we can produce a really good feed, if the farmers don't know how to use it or cannot use it properly, then it's not going to work. And so targeting reducing the economic FCR, food conversion ratio, how much feed we need to make 1 kilo of salmon, is incredibly important. And we can't do that alone. We control the raw materials and nutrients mix. The farmers control the fish, or have an influence on the environment and fish health, and also how they manage the feeding. Together, these three will drive the final FCR, the productivity of our resources that we've put into the feed that get into the resources that get through to the consumer. And just to give you an idea of the fluctuations, we just picked out a couple of customers, one from Scotland in red, one from Norway in blue. And you can see that over the years, we're tending down, but there are fluctuations there because of changes in environment, changes in the raw material bases that we use each year because of availability, because of cost, and because of changes in the customer's requirements. These things aren't completely in our control, but the trend is always to improve. Just coming up to the end, by working with functional feeds to help get more fish through to harvest, we are helping deal with some fairly major costs for the farmers, and also by working to make sure that there's enough omega-3s in the feeds, we're helping to make sure that the feed in salmon, at least, where there's the focus on omega-3s, is providing healthy food for future generations. I've given you a very quick whistle-stop tour of what I think is more than 5 ways that Cargill is helping you to impact on climate change throughout our value chain, upstream, in-house, and downstream, by working with our value chains throughout. The sustainability landscape is incredibly complicated. Here's just a few of the partners that we're working with, and I hope that's given you an idea of how Cargill is working in this aspect. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Just a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure.
Yeah. Does Cargill work with shrimp farms in Southeast Asia that are built on reclaimed mangrove habitat?
We work with a variety of customers throughout Southeast Asia. Some of those are shrimp farms. There's a lot of fish farms. Asia is enormous for aquaculture. The areas which have been developed over the years, there are some environmental issues around that, and yes, there are farms that are built on mangroves. I'm not aware of any policy of Cargill's to select farmers, our customers, which have done that or not. So,
what about the damaging depletion of the soil, which is created by the monocultured soy production?
Again, working with our supply chain, Cargill's not directly involved in farmers, but to try and improve the education of farmers, not just on soy, but also throughout Europe. We have been using monoculture for a long time, and now working out that cycles of different crops help improve soil fertility and basically production over a long period of time. This is an area that we're working with our supply chain, yes.
You now come from a meeting with customers and partners in Asia.
Yes.
And do you think they would buy into the feather and flies in the feed?
We already use feather meal and many other sources of protein and oil around the world. Yes, absolutely. There are sources of waste in Asia, and when you start, and I mentioned earlier that about farm-made feeds, those are all run on waste products from the local farms going straight into the local production. So it's in the culture there, and as long as it's food safe as well, and you mentioned those aspects that we've got to control. Absolutely, these are areas that Cargill and many other feed companies are looking at, particularly in Asia, where the biggest challenge is to meet a hugely growing population with responsible growth. The population is growing faster than we can necessarily produce fully sustainable growth, I think.
Many thanks.
Thank you very
Dave
much.
Robb.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And I have more questions for Dave Robb, and I'm sure he will be happy to take your questions if you approach him in the break afterwards. But first, we've heard several times that the most important thing that we can do against climate change is to make people eat more fish, has been argued from this stage. The next speaker is trying to make people eat more fish through what he calls nudging. So what is that? Let's hear from the head of branding at Lerøy Seafood Group. Please welcome Pål Erik Mikkelsen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to do the consumer perspective in this conference. And first, I just want to show you this. This is Lerøy, the elevator presentation of Lerøy, showing the whole value chain and how we can actually influence on each link in the value chain. Also now with whitefish, as some of you know. I added this last one which we cannot control, but we like to influence. And that's the waste management of the packaging and the material that we also provide to the market. And the reason for that is obvious. You've seen the pictures, you know it's too much plastic in the environment. I also added this last picture here because of the health concern when it comes to childhood obesity, which is quite a concern. 42 million children below the age of 5 was overweighted in 2013. And I will show you what we do to meet those challenges. So nudging. Nudge is a gentle push in the right direction, because information alone is not always get you there. I have teen daughters. I know a few things about that. So you need to push them in the right direction in a subtle way that they are not aware of, without taking away their freedom of choice. And nudging can come in many different ways. You see the one on the right, you probably know. That's the energy-friendly ranking of the electric components. Or you see this World Wildlife Foundation Save the World. These are nudges. They could come in different shapes, colors. It could come in names, in placing in shops, in many different ways. These are the good news. Do you know of the aspirationals? These are representing 40% of the global public. And they have a desire for shopping and desire for responsible consumption. And they trust brands to do the best for the society. The problem is, only half of them can come up with a purposeful name or brand in that way. So we need to build knowledge, we need to inform, and we need to nudge the other part of the public, which is the practicals. 30% are the practicals. I'm hungry, I need food, it's cheap, I buy it. So we need to nudge them to buy our products. So we both need to inform and to nudge. We have done our own surveys in Lerøy, where we see that 60% have no idea or knowledge about our industry. And these guys would like to trust brands that does or do well for the society. We need to inform. We do it by many different ways, but we have this seafood magazine where we talk about our industry, we talk about the people behind, because the aspirational trust people, not machines. That takes product branding to a different level. But I think that's a different conference. It also explains about the health benefits of eating seafood. We have our logo discreet down in the right corner, not to promote. And that's the difference between nudging and traditional marketing. Traditional marketing is where you convince people to buy your product. Nudging is where you push them in the right direction and they end up buying it. It's a good magazine. We also use our social medias to get to tell about our products, our story, and all the good things we do. And of course, the greatest ambassadors, and where we put a lot of effort into innovation, is the product. So the products need to be good, they need to be sustainable. And we need more information. We need more insight. We need more sharing of knowledge between the sectors. We need to learn from those who know this better. And we have two specific nudging projects that's going on. The one is a health food initiative between the health authorities, the food providers, the food industry, and the food producers, hosted and facilitated by Green Nudge and Seafood and Nofima. The whole idea is to influence consumers to choose more fish and eat healthier. And when it comes to food purchase, that's where you turn off everything, and you go in on an autopilot. I want to go in, and I want to get out as quick as possible. The worst message my wife can give me before I leave office is, can you buy some dinner? And I say, what do you want? You can come up with something. Then I will use a lot of effort in the car to the shop, and I will have no chance of getting out there before at least half an hour. I'm not very happy, but still we need food. This is an ongoing project where we actually look at these 5 P's. Promotion and priming. We look at placing and positioning. This is in the shop. Packaging and portioning. What's the right portion? For me, look at me. If I can eat twice as much as the rest of my family. So what's the right portion for me? Price and prompting signs. And if you see here, you can nudge. A nudge can change the choice by 5 to 15% when you nudge at the point of decision in the shop. So this is very important for us. Another program that we've been a part of and still work on is Triple. Some of you heard that last year, I guess, for those of you who were on this conference. It's a societal innovation program, a cross-sectoral one, where the whole idea is to come up with sustainable innovation concepts, together with many different companies. It sounded like a hard task, but we ended up with 20 specific innovation concepts, all with a sustainable footprint. You can see our logo is more or less everywhere. I would talk about this one, which is a dumpster food concept for the cantinas, the student cantinas in Oslo, where they throw away a lot of food in the end of the day. And I found out, what if we buy food that has been expired the same day or maybe the day before? If it's not open and has been stored well, it's more good enough to consume. They narrowed the menu because they didn't know what to get, so they had to just make the menu the same day. They reduced waste, as you can see on the picture here. They lowered the price of purchased raw material, and they sold out every menu they made, every dish they made. And the students were thrilled. These are the aspirationals. And the millennials, you know the millennials are a big part of this. And millennials, they will only work for companies that has a good cause, and they want to be a consumer of the same product in the end. So these were thrilled. And if implemented a whole year, food waste reduction would be 21 tons per restaurant. That's quite a lot. Another project we are in is how can we help our consumers dealing with the packaging waste after consuming our delicious products. And we have this alu tray, the aluminium, which is, in itself is a nudge because it's easy to deal with. The convenience aspect is quite nice, but it's non-degradable product. But it's 100% recyclable. So we need the alu tray to go back into circulation. And by doing a small sticker on the packaging, telling that you buy me, you eat me, you return me, and I go back to circulation, I will end up in the shop again. It's a small nudge, but people were happy because they didn't know about it. If you recycle 1 ton of aluminium, it will save 9 tons of CO2 emissions. 70% of all aluminium being produced in Norway is still in circulation. So it can last forever if you recycle it. And we have to do that. We have to make sure that our products don't end up in the sea or elsewhere. We need to make sure that people can handle the packaging waste. The last concept I would like to talk about is to get health into sports. All of you, or many of you, have been on looking at your kids playing soccer or whatever, and the waffle and the hot dog is what you can buy. And the football school from Tina, which is also in this project, served chocolate milk and cinnamon buns for a whole week, and my kids loved it, because who doesn't? But we need to get health also into these small events, the local events. And we created something called a kick-off kit, which is actually a kit of products you can apply. You can email us, and you can say that we're going to have this event this weekend. We need food or products that we can sell through our cantinas or sell in the event. So they get the products, they sell it, they earn money. It's a triple effect. And we get to get out to consumers and the future consumers. And I have a proof that this works, because kids love sushi. And I always end my presentations, often end my presentation with a SMS correspondence with my daughter when she was 11. For those of you who don't read English, no Norwegian, it says, "I'm on my way. What do you want for dinner?" "Mussels." "Oh, okay, I have to look for that. If not, what then?" "Sushi." And she's 11 years old. And then people say, "Yeah, but she's your daughter. She could have been influenced." But that's the point. So if I start influencing my kids, and everyone does that, that's the result. There's no hot dog, waffles, or pizzas, mussels and sushi. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul Erik Mikkelsen. That's very tempting now because we are on time, so we will end it here. If you have questions for Paul Erik, please approach him in the break. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yes. And we have one session to go in the conference. And when we come back, you will meet the research director of the Marine Research Institute and a man who's aiming to become the next Prime Minister of Norway. So I'll see you here at 11:30, and coffee will be served downstairs.
Spend your days on a 9 to 5, you waste your time on a central line.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. And we are ready to start the final session of the Sustainable Growth Summit. As soon as you have found your seats, we're ready to start. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please take your seats, and we're ready to start the final session of the Sustainable Growth Summit 2016. And we're going to start this session with a target, a vision that you have heard many times. It is to produce 5 times as much seafood by 2050. So we're going to take a closer look at that target. Is it possible? And if so, what would it take to get there? And what pitfalls must be avoided? And for a scientific view, we're going to turn to the Institute of Marine Research and the Research Director for Aquaculture, Marine Environment and Technology. He is here. Please welcome Geir Lasse Taranger.
Thank you, Siri. I think I'm going to be the grumpy old guy today. I think we are at the crossroad, and that's what I will speak about now. So, yes, we have had a fantastic growth since the 80s when it comes to the salmon farming, until recently. But since 2011, we have seen a stabilization of the production due to the sustainability issues. And the question now, with the introduction that Siri made, is can we pursue this 5- to 6-fold increase by 2050 that many are speaking about, and that we feel is the ambitions of the Norwegian government. I think this also has a wider implication. So this is mainly done in open sea cage farming. And can we continue doing the business as we do today? And are open sea cages the future as we do it today? And then I try to, very briefly, to touch upon what do we need of knowledge, technology, and governance to facilitate this wanted growth. As you know, the salmon farming today starts in freshwater, and when the fish are around 100 grams, they are transferred to these open cages. Every year, around 400 million smolts are transferred to around 600 sites along the Norwegian coast, and we have a fantastic coastline to facilitate this sort of production. However, although on the one hand, these sea cages are tremendously efficient in terms of food production, that's because they have this fantastic water exchange, and they are very easy for fish handling, something that people often forget when they want to develop new technology. It's nice, but they have forgot how to get the fish out of the tanks again. But on the other hand, they are in close contact with the environment. They are not only impacted by the environment, but they also heavily impact on the environment. And that's what has stopped the growth of the aquaculture industry in the last few years. Also, their operation is very much dependent on the site, on the exposure, the waves and the currents, and other environmental factors. I think this is summing up. So it's very efficient, but it's also very risky. So that's where we are today. You have all now heard about the salmon lice, and that is the main problem of salmon farming today, and I will come back to explain you why. It's mainly an environmental problem, but it's also, of course, causing big fish welfare problems now with the big handling we have to deal with the problem. But still, we have substantial problem with viral diseases. So, and that's not only for the fish welfare and for the production, but also the potential to affect wild fish. Escapees, although it's improving, it's still a potential problem in terms of genetic impact on the wild salmonids. And also, we must remember that escaped salmon can also transfer diseases to wild fish. And finally, the use of chemical drugs. Although we saw this fantastic story about the antibiotics, we use quite a bit for the salmon lice treatment, and everybody agrees we have to get away from using chemicals to treat salmon lice and find new ways. If you want to read more about how we have arrived to these conclusions, you can read this risk assessment paper that we produced in 2014. And every year, IMR present a full risk assessment of salmon aquaculture in Norway that will go into the details that I will not have time here. So I'm then focusing on this salmon lice story. I think that's a quite good example on how we can develop governance in this challenging field of efficient and risky sea cage operation. For many years now, we have known that salmon lice from farms are affecting wild salmon, sea trout and salmon. And to investigate that, we have a national monitoring program. The IMR and other partners, we spend a lot of effort to monitor wild salmon along the Norwegian coast. Show on this figure using different methods. However, despite this great effort, we have more than 400 salmon populations in Norway and more than 1,100 sea trout populations, so it's extremely difficult to have a proper monitoring. That's why we have been moving into models that can cover the coast in time and space in a much better way. And the good thing in Norway is that the farmers, they are reporting the number of salmon lice every week to the government, and we have good models so we can use the data from the fish farmers real time to predict what will be the situation for the salmon lice, and I'll come back to that. Using all these data, we every year now do a full risk assessment of the impact of salmon lice on the wild salmon, notably the salmon and the sea trout. And this, you see the red and the green and the yellow dots covering different parts of Norway in different years. And that gives a sort of a complete or a differentiated picture. In some years it's quite good, but you can see also it's getting worse in the last few years. The models we use then to get this coverage of the coast in time and space are based on water current models. So in real time now, there's an 800-meter resolution model that is run operationally by the Meteorological Institute. Then we have the wind models and the input from the freshwater. At IMR, we have a more high-resolution model of 160 meters, so we can resolve the currents even in the narrow fjords. And that's the basis, that's the entire basis for the salmon lice model we have been working quite hard with the last few years. So here, on the one panel, we see the water currents in mid-Norway, how they are changing from hour to hour. And then we use the data from the fish farms into this model, and on the right-hand panel, the big panel, you see actually how the salmon lice moves in time and space based on the reports from the fish farmers. And for example, you can, I don't know if the pointer is working here, this area is a national salmon fjord, the Namsen fjord, and you see there's almost no salmon lice in this fjord, so meaning that the Namsen River is quite protected. But up here in the Vikna area, it's a massive problems. I will be brief. So what can we learn both from what we have seen in the salmon farming and using these models? Well, first of all, I think this is the important key message. The sites are very connected through the water currents, but also by transport of fish and equipment between the farms. And as a result, we have seen that diseases spread rapidly between the farms, either if we speak about viruses or more recently the salmon lice. And in particular, the salmon lice, because of its biology, can be dispersed more than 40 kilometers from the site. And that makes it a big, big challenge for us. And on this panel, you can see for the Ryfylke area and the southern part of Hordaland County, the connectivity between the fish farms, which are the black or the blue dots, and the more red color, the higher is the connectivity. And this is the basis also for the production zones or production areas that the Parliament has now endorsed in principle last year. Also what we do is, here you see all the fish farms that are in operation, approximately 600-700 sites at any time. And the color here indicate the lice production per site that goes in every week to us, and we can then predict the distribution of salmon lice along the coast as a forecast that are used for the management. And also, yes, I mentioned that this is the basis for the proposed production zones, and it can also be used then to predict how this will affect the wild fish. Last year, you heard yesterday the State Secretary speaking about the white paper. This is the white paper that the Parliament had on its table last year, and in principle they endorsed the principles to use the risk of salmon lice mortality on wild salmonids as a regional sustainability indicator. We have been speaking about sustainability on this conference, but this is sort of how we make this operational in our case in the Norwegian scheme. And this is done, the popular name of this is the traffic light system. So depending on the outcome of this sustainability assessment in the production areas, the farmers will either be allowed to grow or be stable or have to reduce their operation. Very briefly, so we have already proposed 12 different zones based on these models. The big challenge now is to do this assessment, and we do the assessment towards these thresholds that Parliament has endorsed. So if the mortality of the wild salmonids populations are estimated to be above 30%, then the production has either to decline or other measures has to be taken in place. But the actions that will follow this traffic light system is still under debate as we speak, and it's not finalized. Just showing you the production zones here. They are huge areas, so it's very complex for us to do this assessment. The idea is that the salmon lice, there's a high connectivity within each zone, but there is almost no transport between the zones, and that's the idea of this. And as I mentioned, the growth of the farming activity in each zone will depend on this science-based evaluation of the sustainability. My prediction is also that the farmers need to collaborate much more than to achieve these goals. Otherwise, there will be no growth unless they can tackle this problem. And I see I'm running out of time, so I'll take my take-home message. So they are really risky, but also effective, these cages. There's a high connectivity for salmon lice and other diseases. And that means that the farms affect each other. And to bring this into the future, we need these models. We really need these models so we can know how we can structure the sites and the production to minimize the effects, and also to calculate the regional sustainability. And I hope that you, from this short presentation, see that both scientific knowledge, models, good collaboration between the farmers, but also strong governance are key factors to succeed with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geir Lasse. We have questions coming in, and I have a question for you, because the ministry is now considering these production areas that you and others have recommended. But there is strong opposition from some sources, some actors in aquaculture in particular, and they believe that they may be punished because the neighbor is doing something that's not very good. And isn't that a fair complaint?
On the one hand, I think this is the first time we have sort of a hardwired sustainability limit that will actually, you will either it's okay or it's not okay. And then I think it's the consequences of the system that they foresee that the production may have to be reduced that makes this big debate. But I think what is not so evident in the debate is that there's also alternative solutions to reduction in biomass to tackle the problem. And I think that's, instead of arguing against the system, what should speak about how can we tackle the problem, because I think it's quite evident from science that the problem is real.
Is it possible, someone in the audience asks, to increase production 500% without going further offshore?
Going offshore is not necessarily reducing risk. So I mentioned that open sea cage farming is really risky. Going offshore is more risky. I think what we heard from Harald Sveia yesterday about the closed cages or systems in the fjords may be as effective in tackling the problem as moving offshore.
And that was exactly one question that came in now. Is not the transition to closed containments one of the major solutions to lice, virus, waste, and other issues?
So certainly using closed cage in a larger part of the production would indeed be important for salmon lice, but also making it possible to collect the waste and use it in the circular economy. But that doesn't mean that everything has to go into the closed cage. But I think we have to extend the period when we use closed systems.
And now the questions are really coming in. So, we already know that 66% of total lice exposure comes from the site itself. Hence, we need to invest in research on how to prevent that. What is your thought on that?
Well, that's also a statement that's based on some assumptions. I don't think everybody agree on that assumption, but certainly, I think it is clearly demonstrated that there's a high connectivity between sites, and the neighbor is affecting you to a big degree. And I didn't stop and discuss so much this tragedy of the common. I just wanted you to let that sink in. But I think we have a finite resource, the Norwegian coastal water, and we have to act in a collective manner to solve this problem.
Mm. Is there a risk of environmental damage if we only take salmon lice and risk to wild salmon as measures of sustainability?
I think it's a misunderstanding to think that if we focus on this traffic lice system with the salmon lice, that will be the only regulation. But I think it's made a good argument in the white paper that for this particular use to regulate the growth of the farming industry, the salmon lice is a good candidate because of its dispersing so widely. But of course you need to take all the other aspects into consideration, but not necessarily in this system.
Mm. When it comes to the production areas, some would argue that there is still a lack of facts. What do you think?
I think that will depend on the idea of what will you use the production areas for. If we want to have a more differentiated management regime along the coast, we need to have a certain geographical area to monitor the sustainability status. And I think the production areas is a good way. Instead of treating the entire coast as like one situation, this can be then more differentiated. So we can have one situation here in the Western Norway and another situation in Northern Norway, for example.
Mm. And then we have heard about troubles in the Barents Sea, getting access to areas for the Marine Research Institute. What is the latest update?
Well, this is very hot news, but it seems to be a better opening now for entering with our research vessels from a meeting with the Russian authorities last week. But it's still a very difficult situation. But we hope that we will get access. I think you saw from the presentation by Olav Kjesbø yesterday how important it is to have the coverage also in the eastern part of the Barents Sea, and more notably when the climate change is moving the cod more north and east. That's even more important.
Mm. Well, how do you see it? What is that conflict with Russia about, really?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but what we hear from the people that was in that meeting, it's about the conflict between the military and the fisheries interest in Russia. And I think the military is at present more strong than the fishery interest.
Many thanks, Geir Lasse Taranger.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the questions that are coming in. It's fantastic. So yesterday we heard about the current government's plans for an ocean strategy. And the State Secretary described a historically high funding for research and innovation, and what he called blue growth for a green future. So what is the opposition's plan when it comes to the ocean? We have with us a man who could become very influential on that topic, aiming to become the next Prime Minister. He's the leader of the Labour Party. Please welcome Jonas Gahr Støre.
Thank you so much and good morning. I am impressed by everything I have not heard. I've just read the program. I've seen that it has been at a very high and elaborated level, and I think that is in a way topical for what I would like to address. I am not a scientific researcher, and as Cyril said, I come here from a political perspective. So I'm not going to do a kind of a poor imitation of these excellent scientific introductions you've had, but I'm trying to reflect a bit on what are the implications of everything we hear here from a political perspective. And I'd like to begin with a question that I've been asking students traveling around Norway when you put Norway, modern Norway, into an historic perspective. And I ask the following questions. How could it be that in the 19th century, Norway had scores of people who emigrated and who left Norway for the US. How could people leave a country that had oil and gas, that had waterfall that could create electricity, or that had farms, fjords for fish farming? Now, in that part of my presentation, the students start smiling and they ask, is this guy dumb or something? And the answer is yes, probably yes. The answer to why these people left is because they didn't know. They didn't know that we had, during all these historic periods, assembled oil and gas under the seabed. And they didn't know that you could produce fish farming capacity in the fjords. And they didn't know that the beautiful waterfalls could create electricity. So gradually we did know. And what defined Norway was really what we could create out of the oceans. And I would say that this is a fundamental political issue at the beginning of the 21st century, because it is a question about how do we define ourselves as we look ahead. And as we saw on the figure, and you have discussed, we were aiming for a 5-fold increase in fish farming of salmon in the next decades. But the general message you get when you are with young people is that we have probably reached the peak. Norway has become rich, we have oil and gas, we have a green future, we have a challenge, and now oil prices have come down, and we probably are, peaking and perhaps going down. We have to get accustomed to new times. And I think that's right from one perspective. But when it comes to the oceans, I think the history and my vision is that we are rather at an early stage of something which can become really big than at a peak that will take us down. And that's all about what is in our heads. Now, my second perspective then as a politician is from my experience as foreign minister of Norway during 7 years. And I came to the office in 2005. And I illustrated this by my rotating chair in the foreign minister office. So I could rotate all around. And I was trying to look around and say, where do we find the biggest challenges and opportunities for Norway 2005? So if I looked straight east, I looked into Sweden. And that's pretty stable, you will agree. I looked south and I looked into the European Union, where we have an agreement, the European Economic Area, cooperating, pretty stable. And if you look west, you look across the North Sea, the Great Britain, it was before Brexit, so it was stable. And then across the Atlantic, stable. When you look to the north, you see the change. So when you look to the area where there are not most people, but the most fantastic nature, we see the changes. 3 big drivers. 1, climate change. And the perspective of the opening sailing routes across the Northeast Passage. And the IPCC in the early part of last decade estimated that that could be sailing through without ice by the end of the century. And when the final version came, they wrote 2050, 2060. And now we know it's happening. So this is hugely, geography and climate is redefining the North. And the second observation was, of course, that new natural resources are changing, fish are migrating, and resources become available that used not to be available. So if you have climate and resources changing, it is and transport lines opening up, it's a driving force of change. And the third element, of course, is Russia. Because Norway can never choose, you never choose your geography, it's there, and Russia will remain our neighbor. So in that government's priority, the High North became #1, strategic priority for Norway, which was about sorting out the High North, defining our strategies, going for what the potential would be for Norway. And that, I think, was pretty much not disputed across the political spectrum. So, from my side, a main role, and I will insist on this because it is important for my next point on the oceans, was to define Norway's borders. Because if we are going to have ambitions for what we can do with the oceans, we have to have fixed borders. And basically we have that with most of our neighbors, but for 40 years we have had a disputed border with Russia. You don't want to have a disputed border with your neighbor. And in particular, you don't want to have a disputed border with that neighbor. We had 175,000 square kilometers disputed out there because of the law of the sea and the extension of 200 nautical miles, and where should we draw the line? So the priority for my mission as foreign minister was to try to see if we could end 40 years of negotiation. And you don't just end that because you sit around the table, you have to have a bit of luck, and you have a bit of hard work to find the right moment where you could reach compromise with Russia on such an issue, which we did in 2010, splitting that area down in the half, 50 to Russia, 50 to Norway %, and the line which is drawn is following the most modern principles of the law of the sea. So now Norway has wholly drawn lines of maritime border with all our neighbors, Russia, Iceland, Denmark, Greenland, and then further south in the North Sea. And that brings me to the second point, that what really then emerges as we draw towards 2020 is that the next chapter in the High North version, and here I say the High North as a political notion, not as a geographical notion, a line in the map saying if you're north of this, you are High North, if you are south of it, you are kind of south or middle. But High North is a political vision for what Norway is north on the globe, heading towards this big Arctic. And you can speak about that in Grimstad in the south, in Bergen, in Trondheim, and of course up in northern Norway. And I believe that the trends you have been discussing here come together for Norway to define the oceans to be the next chapter in the story of our nation. This might sound a bit pompous and big, but I think it is important for countries and people like the Norwegian people, to see its own historic development as a story to which we all belong, to find where our contributions really are. Now, you've been through these elements, which I think we have to start communicating more broadly to pupils and students, to business, and throughout the administration, not dealing with fish, ocean, and the specificities, that Norway is uniquely placed to take a lead in this next chapter. What we did in the High North was to say that every area where we could have an advance on new ideas, we should explore to the maximum. So when we defined the High North strategy and an Arctic strategy based on the law of the sea, we were earlier than the European Union and the United States and a number of other countries, and they came pretty close to copying the main guidelines of our strategies. I believe some of these same issues apply when we defined an ocean strategy. And here you will say, well, the State Secretary yesterday talked about an ocean strategy. So what's the difference? Well, it will be much better with us. That is the difference. Well, you see, I don't think it is surprising that we from all political spectra see the ocean as the big thing. When you fly into Norway from the east, what do you see? You see the oceans 6 times the size of the land, and you see a thin strip of land where people live. So the question is here, what is the priority we define to an ocean strategy? How do we make it apply, and how do we get ownership to it from a political perspective? And it should not be by playing scientists, because many of you are the right scientists. This fine university, for example, which I visited 3 weeks ago, and with the rector we went around all the different sectors to see how uniquely placed this university is to contribute to our oceans. Bergen has half of Norway's skills, ability, and knowledge and research on oceans. So clearly on fisheries and on the whole lively space, Bergen is in a key role. But we have to define the ocean as a cross-sector priority. That's why I have said, and now we are into politics, that if we win elections, I will bring the ocean strategy with me to the office of the Prime Minister, and we will spend time, let's say half a year, to put the components together under the leadership of the Prime Minister, and then hand it out to the appropriate ministries to take responsibility. Because here is the important part. Even though we agree that the oceans contain elements from fish farming to oil and gas to shipping to marine researchers to the blue economy, we are victims of silo thinking. So money is spent in silos, political attention is given in silos. Ideally, you would have a government with no ministries, because everything is linked in the perspective. You can't work like that. So you need to divide labor. But I believe we need to lift the whole area of oceans out of the silos, put it together with a comprehensive view in that political body of a government, in close dialogue with Parliament, and in close dialogue with all the knowledge centers that we find around the Norwegian coast. And here, when I talk about the Norwegian coast, I'm even willing to go all the way up to Rjukan and the inland, because there is knowledge and skills and industrial insights into what it takes really to make this new chapter in all parts of Norwegian industry, knowledge-based sectors, and they should be involved. I would like to see what we called verdiskapningsprogram for havnæringene, a value creation program for the ocean industries. Because clearly so much of our new employment and our new value creation has to come out of that. And we have to make our public mechanisms supporting investment, supporting research, supporting activity, more look coherently towards targets that we can define together. Talking to young people, it is fascinating to tell them that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the seabed. That we know about the few top layers of species on the top of the big pyramid, and we just start to know how little we know, which I think is also a stimulating story to young people who go into research. And as I've heard here at the University of Bergen, you now run very advanced civil engineer studies for fish farming, new students coming in, because they're going to explore this. And we're going to tell them that, you know, we're not at the end, at the peak of a story, we may be just at the beginning, and you will be the front runners. That is what I think will motivate them. So, again, the OECD talks about a potential of doubling the value creation from ocean economy by 2030. And all the figures, they are fine. But I also come to this from the perspective that we are dealing with the threatened species, the oceans. And I don't know how much you've been into this during this conference, you probably have, but I really think that again is a clarion call for young people and also for older people to make them aware how dramatic this really can be. And what we learned a few months ago, I think was the content of microplastic in cod here in Bergen, which was still at a level which was scaring. But the really scary part is that the weight of microplastic compared to the real fish in a few years will be 1-to-1. And we may be at irreversible tipping points. So what we're really dealing with is this unique potential of value creation, of work in a growing world population. 70% of this, why do we call it planet Earth? We should call it planet ocean. 70% is ocean. And so little of our food comes from the oceans. But that can be even a very high level if we don't treat it seriously as a threatened species. Well, now it has been defined as a sustainable development goal of its own, number 14. But that gives me also the hunch that if Norway wants to take a lead, as I think we should, on creating, defining this as a national strategy and priority, we also have to define this sustainability goal and this threat of a threatened species as a priority in our foreign policy and development policy. Norway has lifted issues on the international agenda in areas where we have had special competence. We've done it in health, vaccine initiative, immunizing every child, we have been taking a lead. I applaud the current government for the initiative on child education. We did it on rainforests, and I believe the next big initiative Norway should take, pooling our resources, is really on this issue, on saving the oceans. Not one country can do that, but there are about 200 different instances in the world that sees itself as having a global responsibility on oceans. Very poor governance. Very poor governance. Much worse than any other uniquely global resource. And here again, I think we can make a difference. So, what should be the main elements of such a project? Let me end on that. The first one, I think, is that we need a very coordinated push on knowledge, research. And I use this word, which is, in these military times, perhaps the wrong word, but we need to conquer the ocean space. And I don't say that as a military vision, I say it as a knowledge vision. And even in the Norwegian press, people are, making fun of the notion ocean space, because they find that to be too much of a hype word. I think it's a lovely word. I mean, what do we see out there? Well, we see space. And what should we see from the top of the ocean and down to the seabed? Well, it is a sea space, and we need to conquer it. And there are concrete proposals on how we could do that, ranging from the ocean space tank up in Trondheim to supporting targeted research on the different elements of conquering knowledge of the ocean space. And here I think there is huge potential in different sectors of our economy, in industry, in research, in management, in university sectors, to define the project for how we can conquer the ocean space and divide the responsibility, and look at the money flows and see how that can be oriented. Second notion is, of course, to create what we all would agree, the blue economy and the blue growth. I have called for a value creation program, which will also, of course, include the industrial perspective from new industrial potentials at the seabed, which again requires Norway to be very strong on international law, because it is a bit uncharted land in some sectors. And at this fine university, international law, ocean law, plays an important role. That is good. But we still have, and we still have this tradition of comprehensive management plans for our oceans, and we should also bring that into the way we define, the blue economy areas of emphasis. I personally think that there are challenging and very fascinating links between the blue economy and the green economy. We even have a university which we call Green Blue at Ås that will contribute with its new knowledge. And I think we need both a competition and a better synergy between our fine research institutions and universities to contribute to the blue economy emphasis. Then, of course, we have a great potential in the renewables, which I think is an issue for the years to come. Be it ocean wind, be it the waves and the shifts, salt water, fresh water, the combinations. Not necessarily for energy that will apply to Norway, but skills that can take Norwegian industry out to the global markets. And we have supported from the Labour Party that we should be more in the forefront of testing ocean wind and see how that can apply and be brought to scale industrially. Number 4, I believe also in the maritime infrastructure perspective. The fact that we are at the entry of the Arctic Ocean is a unique opportunity that we need to address in a comprehensive way. When I was at the Foreign Ministry, I commissioned a study on what are the strategic opportunities of our infrastructure sailing into the Arctic. Not every port can be a deep sea port. But how do we define our resources and distribute our resources to see to it that that entry sailing point to the Arctic becomes a strategic asset for Norway? Search and rescue, the future of our living up to our responsibility in the Arctic Council, of a big area where Norway has responsibility, the role of the Svalbard Islands in that perspective when the Arctic Ocean opens up, I think is something we need to address from the perspective of a great opportunity. And my last point is then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, international cooperation for saving the oceans. Here we should really prepare a program and allocate resources and find the appropriate allies to move ahead and set these agendas. Because if we don't, that sustainability goal number 14 will become a paper tiger. And we cannot afford that to happen. The challenge is too serious to do this. So these are elements which we need to bring together. And again, Norway, which is in overall terms, 7th country in terms of allocating money to research in value creation linked to the oceans and the fisheries. We are a small country, but the 7th in size here, has a unique position to move forward. Now, there are countries that are bigger than us in certain sectors, but I think if you combine industry, research, and management capacity, we are in a unique position. And as we did with the High North strategy, and I'll just repeat that, in every area where we have an ID advance, where we are ahead the others on ideas and concept, we have an opportunity to move forward. And I think on comprehensive ocean management, we have a unique starting position, which we should explore. And then we should have fascinating stories to tell and to motivate young people also to choose this line of orientation. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Jonas Gahr Støre. And been sitting listening to you, and I was listening to the State Secretary yesterday. And I'm trying to find out what is the biggest difference when it comes to ocean thinking and strategy. And is there one concrete issue where you really disagree with what the government is doing when it comes to oceans?
Well, I think the fact that, I think they have been copying a few of our ideas, but that's okay. But I would applaud, I think it is good for Norway that this is across the board, attention is brought to the oceans, and that there is competition among parties to, make the best of our ocean opportunities. I would think that is fine. Well, first of all, I think they are not adamant enough on preserving the public and national ownership to these resources, because that is critical when it comes to fish in particular.
How could that be done more effectively?
Well, I mean, it could be done in a way that, as of now, we like to say that there are key natural resources which belong to the people. Fish, oil, gas, the hydro water resources, and they are managed in different ways, of course, because they are different resources. But I believe that part of what they are doing in terms of structural reforms in the fishery sector may weaken that link to the local communities along the coast, which is bad for those local communities, but it's very dangerous also for decoupling the link between all the knowledge which has been along in the coastal communities and the way we develop our industries in the future. Because if that link is broken, you don't get the historic baggage, and we're going to get the challenge in recruiting people into the sector. Secondly, I believe, and as I've called for, we can do more in these difficult times when it comes to employment to support project value creation and risk sharing between public investment programs and what industry is ready to do to move forward in areas where you are not perhaps 100% mature in the markets.
So you think they're too passive?
Defensive, I would say, and not attentive enough to support that ownership factor. And finally, I think that we have some big locomotives in this country when it comes to industry and research. And whereas they have a program of selling out and limiting those ownership positions, I would rather use them strategically so that we can have guarantee that research will be in Norway and that they will be locomotives that can bring along the smaller entities.
like to bring in a blog that you have published together with Professor Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Center, published on Huffington Post. It's called A Global Partnership for Ocean Health. And there you draw quite a dark picture of the situation for fisheries today. You say that most of the world's fisheries could have collapsed beyond recovery by the middle of the century. And you propose one way to improve the situation, which is more surveillance, by using the effective surveillance systems that we have. And there is one question from the audience about that. Ocean surveillance from space is an important aspect of ocean research and exploration, but the current government is cutting 75% of financing to collaboration in the European Space Agency. Where do you and does the Labour Party stand on this issue?
Well, on that precisely cut, we will address that in the Parliament next week, because the danger of this is that it is cut, as I understand, it's cut to the minimum required to maintain the voting rights. But experience shows that the money we put into these programs has come back to Norwegian industry because they apply for projects which should be maintained. Surprisingly enough, Norway is also a space nation, because we've been clever on doing this in the north. One project that was dear to me when I was foreign minister was the Barents Watch project, where we developed a combined project of the knowledge you get from meteorological services, from other civil surveillance services, and put them together electronically in a digital way, so that the man on the fishing boats or the people on land can get updated information communicated, comprehensively. This is a unique project that is now being studied in the Pacifics, in other parts of the Atlantic. And Professor Rockström, who is a man worthwhile listening to, is a leading scientific on resilience. He is the one who's drawing these clarion calls that it can collapse beyond, repair. And the idea here is that so much of what is going on out there now, trawling at 2,200 meters, sweeping the seabed, destroying the seabed, is happening basically unchecked. And you cannot have coast guards all around at these global international seas, but you can monitor through satellites. It is possible. But one reason why it's hard to do is that the global management systems and governance to propose and enforce such systems is very weak. So what Rockström is saying, we have the technological means to do it. He points to Norway to say that what we are doing in terms of monitoring and what we heard here before my intervention, I think is a brilliant illustration of how we can use science and surveillance to follow even the lice in the oceans. Well, then we can also monitor some bigger fish in a double meaning. So I think that's a good proposal.
If we go back now to your earlier political life, you were key to drawing that dividing line, or actually getting that agreement with Russia. And it was a success story. And now we're hearing researchers talk about the difficulties in the Barents Sea, and especially with Russia, the military versus the research considerations. How does it all look from your perspective?
Well, as I said, being neighbor to Russia is always going to be Norway's past, present, and future. And it's a challenging neighborhood. But we've become pretty good at managing that. And let me just, use 2 minutes on that, because it challenges Norwegian diplomats, decision makers, researchers, fishing management in the following way. Norway is two things to Russia. We are a part of the West. We have our allies. We are a part of NATO. We have our European partners, on the one hand. On the other hand, we are neighbors. And if you are a neighbor, you have to deal with each other as neighbors. And we managed during difficult times, during the Cold War, still to manage a neighborhood relationship under the radar of the big geopolitical issues. And that is the skill of this complicated partnership. And I would say, and I've said that, I think, and we support the government in, being an ally and being firm at reacting of part of Russia's behavior out there in the world. But the other part of that equation of managing the neighborhood policy, I think we are too defensive. because that is an everyday business where you have to find out, we share the same bioeconomy out in the Barents Sea. We are coastal states. If something happens, incidents at sea, we have to find ways. Now, if it is true that, we have found ways of doing research expeditions into each other's water, which is a fine example of being neighbors. Remember, we managed the Norwegian Arctic cod together. 50-50, this is the world's most valuable cod stock. And that requires the two neighbors to do this in a way which is both creative and built on some trust. So the fact that the Russians were denying our access to doing this expedition is both very negative from a scientific perspective, but also very negative from a political perspective. So if that is being loosened up so it can continue, it is important and it's a good thing.
Do you experience that there is a real conflict on the Russian side here between the scientists and the military, sort of a process going on?
Absolutely. But you find conflicts of interest between government authorities in every country. But when we negotiated the dividing line with Russia, one thing was to negotiate Norway-Russia, but there was also a negotiation going on the Russian side of the table. And remember, we did a lot of work on this until the fall of the wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then we had to restart when Russia became Russia. And at the other side of the table, you would have local authorities, fishing authorities, private fishing industry, public fishing industry, KGB, or whatever they call themselves these days, Moscow and Murmansk and all the rest of it. So they have to find out amongst themselves. But I think others who negotiate with us also see that we have different authorities with different interests.
It was reported afterwards that it actually took a football match and some vodka to get that agreement.
Yes, but I'm sober now.
Yeah.
I'm sober.
There is a question from the audience. Someone asking, when do you think we can export seafood to Russia again?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, I think the Russian consumers miss it. It's bad for them. Well, when will that happen again? If I say that, that will happen perhaps in 2 or 3 years, it means I have a very optimistic view on what will go on in Europe. What will happen in Syria? What is geopolitical? Because the cold winds in the north, politically, rarely originate from the north. They originate from other issues which we don't control. So I would rather say as soon as possible, I would wish that to happen.
Now we're sort of moving into things that are very relevant to this audience. One is, will you allow mine disposal in the fjords? And if yes, how will that help save the oceans?
Well, I don't think mine disposals in the fjords automatically is a threat to the fjords. It depends on what is the substance, what is the frequency, and that depends on the minerals and on the circulations in the fjords and the study that the authorities will have to apply. I think on that very specific issue which is being discussed in Førdefjorden, I believe that the authorities have made a thorough evaluation, that is feasible inside the framework of what one could accept as an industrial nation. We still have to, or should be on that path. And in other areas we should say no. If the emissions and the outlets from these activities bypass the threshold levels that have been defined.
And then what is your view on growth in salmon production?
Well, this great growth came basically during our years in government, and we support that. And I think that target of 5-fold growth till 2050, 2060 is across the board shared in Parliament. But of course, it has to be done according to strict principles linked to the environment and all the rest of it. And I have been criticizing the Minister or the State Secretary here yesterday from jumping back and forth on his on his view on science here. On the one hand saying, I think it will be okay, and attacking scientists for being against the industry when they can come up with their warning signs. I don't think a minister should do that. I think the minister should listen very carefully and chart the path to that goal, which I think is possible and feasible, but based on criteria that industry has to relate to, in dialogue with industry and in dialogue with research.
And then how important would you say that knowledge of the seafood industry is for a potential Prime Minister of Norway?
Once more?
How important would you say that knowledge of the seafood industry is for a potential Prime Minister of Norway?
Very important, because this is a very important sector, and it will take a good part of the time of a Prime Minister. It has, and I'm certainly it does for the current Prime Minister as well. But I'd like to add one thing, and that is, I told you that I think this issue of putting together this ocean strategy should not be just left for one ministry. It should be lifted to the Prime Minister at the initial stage and given importance and direction. But the second part, which I think is a big concern, and that is that this sector, as all other sectors of our industry, will be confronted with the huge technological shift we're going into. I mean, some people say that we are standing in the middle of 12 parallel Gutenberg revolutions. And the first Gutenberg revolution, or the real Gutenberg revolution, was a pretty serious one, printing. But now we may have 12 coming all together. And in that perspective, I think a Prime Minister in Norway does not have sufficiently good advice to handle that. And be it the current one or me, with the structure we have, it is not good enough. And that's why I've said, you know, they say about President Obama that the biggest difference between him in 2008 and 2016 is this. When he came in, this technological dimension was for the nerds, and when he goes out, he is saying that nobody gets near the cabinet room if you don't really know what is about to happen with digitalization, virtual reality, nanotechnology, and all of that. And there we lack something in the Norwegian decision-making system, and that I also intend to change.
We heard here yesterday about ocean acidification, and that it will take 600 generations to reverse the changes already seen. The oceans are turning more sour. And the speaker said it has to stop now, the CO2 emissions, at latest in 24 years. And your party is positive to opening for a consequence evaluation of Lofoten, Vesterålen, oil and gas. And how can you do that if this is the scientific evidence?
Well, first of all, I don't see that issue as primarily a climate issue. That is an issue about environment, relations with fisheries, nature, and conservation. I was with Professor Rockström in Stockholm last week, and he showed me his curves for the rest of this century if we are to reach the goal of 1.5 or 2 degrees set out in Paris. And the objective there is that by the mid of next decade, we have to stop the decline, and there has to be a 6 to 8% reduction of CO2 emissions every year, which is a huge task. And that has to come from the transition of the economy so that the demand for energy that can produce electricity will come less from coal, oil and gas, but coal is the main thing, and then over to renewables. Norway has to be part of that. And one issue which he shows on his graph is that the ocean's capacity to be the sink is about to be fully absorbed. It cannot absorb more of the emissions. And he points to one thing, which I'm seeing now coming up in the scientific debate. We have to develop capacity of capture and storage, CCS, where Norway has already invested quite a bit, and which I still believe we have to be ahead of. Because it is really not oil and gas in itself, it is the emissions coming out of oil and gas. So that issue, I think, will need to be addressed.
So you think the emissions can be taken to zero?
It has to be taken to global zero by the mid of this century.
And what would be the role of the government in all this? What is, the industry is one thing. What would the government have to do?
Well, what the government and parliament has done is to say, for example, that by 2025, there will be no cars sold in Norway on fossil energy. That's a big thing. 2025 is, around the corner. It's a big signal to industry. If you want to be a car company in Norway, selling cars in Norway, that is the bottom line. And then we have to continue massively to work with industry to cut emissions. And we have to work with our global partners so that the price on these emissions, especially on coal, develops in such a way that we will demand other sources of energy, other renewables. I mean, I think in a few years, we may look back and say, when was there a shortage of energy? Because we are about to capture sun. We're about to manage wind. And then there will be abundance, and that will challenge a lot of power structures. But I don't think that Norway's contribution will here be to say that we will make our contribution by cutting out our element, but we will face, as the Statoil head said the other day, that demand is going down, and it should go down gradually as demand will shift to other sources.
Final question from the audience. Is carbon tax an option for the future?
We have a carbon tax. In Norway we have a CO2 tax.
Would you like to raise it?
Well, I mean, I think we have raised it and pushed it as far as we can and should, giving our industry still, predictable scenario. But what we should have globally is a price on CO2, which should be much higher than it is now. I mean, now it may be 300-400 kroner per kilo, per ton, and it should, of course, be much higher, really, to influence the patterns. And there we are not. And Norway can not do that on its own, but we have to be very attentive also to seeing how that can influence choices of industry.
We heard yesterday that we're waiting for the ocean strategy from the government coming next spring. If you were going to give a short version, one-line version of your ocean strategy, what would that one-liner be?
Maximizing our potential within a responsible framework.
Many thanks, Jonas Gahr Støre, and many thanks for all the questions that are coming in here. We are coming towards the end of the conference, but there is one highlight remaining. We have the closing remarks, and they will be given by one of the partners in the NCE Seafood Cluster. He is the Managing Director of Cargill Aqua Nutrition, Norway. Please put your hands together for Fredrik Witte.
Thank you, Siri. I've never been called a highlight before, so it's a good way to start the speech. Let me start out by saying that after having been part of today's summit, I'm both impressed and inspired. I'm impressed by the level of cross-spectrum knowledge coming together and sharing that competency in a very simple way, and inspired by the opportunities that sustainability and the work within that gives us. Sustainability should be viewed as an opportunity and not only a challenge. So with those words, on to my closing remarks. I want to thank you for spending the last 2 days with us. Special thanks to all our contributors that have given us valuable new insights on important sustainable pathways to achieve our goal of sustainable growth. My name, as Siri said, is Fredrik Witte. I am the Managing Director of Cargill Aqua Nutrition Norway, formerly known as EWOS Norway. We are a proud partner of the Seafood Innovation Cluster. Cargill recently refined its strategic purpose, which states that we want to nourish the globe in a safe, responsible, and sustainable manner. Our mission in the cluster is to increase our contribution of sustainable and healthy seafood, to create new knowledge-based jobs, and to contribute to the necessary shift in green economy in Norway. This is our challenge, but together it is also an opportunity. Yesterday, State Secretary Berg highlighted that by 2050, the planet will be home to more than 9 billion people. Food production must increase by 70%. In his opening speech, he highlighted the importance of fish-to-food security and nutrition. He stated that fish should get the recognition it deserves. We could not agree more. In the decades ahead, the oceans will play a larger role in the global economy. Today, only 17% of all animal protein consumed globally comes from the sea. Yet 70% of the surface is covered, or 70% of the earth is covered by oceans. In other words, there's a huge potential for ocean food production. I'm sure we all agree. The UN states that we are about to reach the limit for agricultural production. Finding new ways to produce food is crucial. Ocean farming, however, needs to be developed in a sustainable way. The footprint on the environment must be at an acceptable level. Cargill, together with global seafood companies such as Lerøy, Marine Harvest, and Grieg Seafood, have committed to a sustainable seafood production. Sustainability is a part of everything we do. Yesterday's climate science session reminded us of the urgency to take climate action. Climate change is real and will affect our business. I'm not sure Donald Trump agrees, but every day we make investment decisions that will affect the health of our planet for decades to come. As stated by Professor Gunnar Eskeland from the Norwegian School of Economics, changing the way we think about climate change will not only be the key to limiting global warming, it will also be our competitive advantage towards a future of sustainable business growth. The good news is that seafood has a climate advantage. Studies show that the Norwegian seafood products are competitive both in terms of carbon footprint and the use of energy. This is a fact, both in comparison to other seafood products, but also to land-based meat production. In the cluster, we stress the urgency to act now. The cluster has launched a new seafood trainee program presented by 4 of our young, promising leaders yesterday. Personally, I get a lot of inspiration from including young people's ideas and minds in our daily challenge. How to create a sustainable future is key. Working with young and passionate people fills me with hope. They inspire me. In the past 15 years, the seafood business has made tremendous sustainability achievements. Several good examples have been highlighted at the summit today. Salmon has been the #1 driving force for sustainable investments due to its economic value. Today, Cargill is expanding its sustainability investments from salmon, but also to other aquaculture species, and contributing to a sustainable change in global aquaculture. So what is our sustainability agenda for 2030? What will change? I'd like to highlight 3 areas. Number 1, transparency. There will be nowhere to hide. Transparency is becoming the new norm. The creation of social media has connected and mobilized people around the world, driving transparency as a prerequisite for sustainability. I remember an old CFO of mine said that what gets measured gets results. Huge progress has been made by the seafood industry to improve business disclosure. We are today far more open about our sustainability impact than 10 years ago. Standardizing reporting will help benchmark performance, letting transparency serve its purpose. Secondly, is realizing greater global leadership by working to integrate sustainability into all relevant corporate functions, such as procurement, marketing, R&D, and product development. Engaging and participating in forums such as the Global Salmon Initiative to encourage sustainable change and sharing of knowledge and best practice. Lastly, we must establish new forms of cross-sector collaboration in order to deliver smarter, longer-term solutions. The goal is to facilitate partnerships for more collective actions. The cluster is a good example of a partnership hub to increase partnership activities. A key is to increase our engagement in multi-stakeholder dialogues. The Sustainable Growth Summit is a good example of bringing stakeholders together to discuss challenging issues, but also to find practical solutions. So what are the take-home messages from this year's summit? Maybe summarized in 2 words, it's about innovation and cooperation. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the UN Sustainability Goals provide us with a roadmap for the future we want. What we now need is effective and concerted actions. This will require investment in innovation, and we have no time to lose. We can only succeed by collaboration. The Seafood Innovation Cluster has committed us to long-standing and a binding partnership. The opportunities that lie in our oceans will not be realized by themselves, but we can seize the opportunities through cooperation and interaction between government, research, and industry. In our response lies opportunities for innovation and value creation that will demonstrate Norway's seafood leadership and shape our sustainable business future. Together, and I'm sure you share this after the last 2 days, we represent a strong force for sustainable development. I want to thank you all for contributing to valuable insights over the last couple of days on how we together can take industrial leadership in leading a sustainable pathway for seafood growth. Thank you also to Cyril, our great moderator over the last 2 days. And thank you also to Tanya and the team for arranging and all the hard work that you've put in bringing us together. Before I say thank you, I have housekeeping that I was told to tell you. Their lunch is downstairs. Thank you very much.